Okay, so I lied before. Instead of at 7:03, I'm calling the meeting to order at 7:04. So can we all stand and say the pledge? Fantastic. So next up is the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to accept the consent agenda? Anyone? So. Okay. Well, Laura, you wrote the minutes, so you
I
can't.
said so. Oh, I can't.
No. Okay, Kathleen, okay. All in favor? Okay. Wendy? Since you're online, I can't see you. Are you voting yes or no on the consent agenda? Wendy?
Sorry, I was having trouble with my iPad. I'm
Wendy, can you hear
abstaining.
us?
Abstaining. Not muted. I'm abstaining.
I can't hear you. Can you? Thumbs up for yes, thumbs down for no, thumbs to the middle for no, you don't accept the consent agenda. Okay, well, it passes 6-1. Okay, next up after the consent agenda is our public hearing. Do we have our fantastic high school speakers here? Come on down. I see one. Are you representing? Perfect.
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Jones, and esteemed community members. As always, it's great to be here to share the strides that we're making as student government to foster a more connected and vibrant school community. First, I wanted to give you guys some updates on our student government subcommittees. The Environment and Student Center Committee, led by Ben Varghese, is researching the possibility of replacing the plastic utensils in the Cardinal Cafe with compostable and environmentally friendly ones. This initiative aligns with the school's broader efforts to promote sustainability. Meanwhile, the Food Services Committee, chaired by Mark Zolotarevsky, has been working to introduce healthier and more diverse menu options. Future additions may include Z-bars to the vending machines, and they are also considering offering coffee-flavored milk alongside chocolate milk in the cafeteria. There's even a possibility of adding hot chocolate to the breakfast menu. Additionally, to improve efficiency in the cafe, they're exploring the use of stanchions to help organize lines. The committee will also be sending out a feedback form next Wednesday during advisor base to receive students' inputs on our dining options. On the school spirit front, Amy Wilders is leading efforts to encourage students to wear green in the celebration of St. Patrick's Day. These initiatives, led by dedicated student leaders, reflect a collective effort to enhance the school environment in meaningful ways. Last but not least, Mahir and I express our full support of the superintendent's proposed 2025 to 2026 budget. We reaffirm the board's commitment to increasing our school budget and providing the best learning experience possible for our students. Thank you for your dedicated support, and we're excited to share our updates again at the next meeting.
Thank you, Rocky. And when Mahir gets here, we'll let him come on up. But next up are our GEA comments. I don't see Lil here. Lil, are you online?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Hello.
Take it away.
All right, here we go. Hi, good evening, Chair Hirsch, Superintendent Dr. Jones, Board of Ed members. William Perone, President of the Greenwich Education Association. Had lots of time. I lost power for a couple days here, so I had nothing to do. So I read through board docs and 56 pages of the public consulting group to keep myself busy. Quite a lot to digest there. One statement in the very beginning of the report caught my eye, and I hope it's just a typo. statement, November 24th, PC&G visited 13 schools and a variety of programming and GPS over 2 days, including Winrow's Alternative Community Connections and pre-K. Overall, 80 classrooms were visited. During these visits, classrooms were observed for 15, 30 minutes. Depending on the subject area, classrooms were randomly selected, representing schools and grades. The intent was to get a cross-section. I hope it's a typo because I can't even do that in 2 days. It took me a week. 80 classrooms, that's 15 minutes, lowball it, be conservative. 80 classrooms, 15 minutes each is 1,200 minutes divided by 60 minutes to give you 20 hours. 2 schools, 7 hours a school day. So that would 10 hours each day. That doesn't even include driving time to each of the schools. So I'd like to know if that's a typo. If not, there's no way that's accurate information. Also, it states in 2024, the report serves as both a reflection on strides made since 2020-21, audit and honest appraisal of the ongoing work required to achieve GPS vision for special educations. Yes, I agree. We have made great strides and improvements, and I am thankful for that. But we still have lots more work to do, and I do have some concerns. Some of the topics in there, just to be brief for everyone. PD staff view these sessions as insufficient, describing them as one and done initiatives. They lack follow-up and ongoing approach. Specialized evaluation teams addition. Staff highlighted challenges in executing co-teaching models effectively, with some staff expressing concerns they need still insufficient planning time. And then an accomplishment of reduction in outplacements from 42 to 32. My concern, as always, as this is a budget year, and I do approve of the superintendent's budget, but I still think it's not enough to run the district the way it should be. All these things that we're asked to improve from this report cost money. It costs money to pay for training.
Lil, I think we lost you. Technical difficulties on your end?
Oh, when did you leave me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Yeah,
Lil,
I
I
was,
think the issue is, they can't hear you in the room, but they're working on correcting it.
So we should ask her to pause.
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Wendy, I can hear you.
Thank you, Lil.
I can hear you as
Now we
well.
can hear you.
Everybody, oh, you can hear me now? Karen, can you hear me?
It's Lil's back. Front row.
Lil, I can hear you. I don't know if they can hear me or you.
Lil, this is Mike. Can you hear me?
Karen, yeah, everybody online and the public can hear each other. It's something on your end, you can't hear us. Yeah, or you can just go on with your meeting. Oh, I'm back? Okay.
Sorry for the technical difficulties on our end.
Okay, am I back?
You're back.
All right,
And
so
better than ever.
all right, so here's the test. Ready, Karen? What was the last thing that you heard?
Can you hear me?
Wendy, we can hear you too now.
Okay, thank you.
I heard you say that it's a budget year and it's not enough to run the district the way it should be.
Oh, that's like from the beginning.
That was the last thing we heard you say.
Okay, all right. So I'll take yeah, did I tell you about the 80 classroom visit?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a budget year. So we're concerned that, in the other Other things that I mentioned, the PD that was asked, establishing of special evaluations teams, of speech and language pathologists,
And more planning time.
and more planning time. All those things cost money. And my concern is paying consultants, specialized staff, and if we're being asked by the BET to find cuts, we can't make cuts. There's not enough money even to do this. So I'm like pleading with the town. You must get tired of hearing me saying the same things. Also, Mr. McCanty Anthony, you're going to do a first read tonight on the policy 4121 about requirements for substitutes, which DPS had to raise, which they had to because we weren't even paying them the state minimum requirement. We're not getting paras because we're not competitive enough, and we're losing them to other districts. My teachers are getting tired and stressed out, and they're covering for classes, they're covering for paras, they're going in and helping as much as we can. I know it's hard in other districts, but we have to figure it out. Other districts are figuring it out. We need our town, our BET, our parents to keep supporting our public schools and to fund the budget at its max. Thank you.
Thank you, Lil. I see Mihir has showed up. So do you want to come up and speak while he's walking up? I believe congratulations are in order.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay.
It's very snowy and it's hard to get here from Glenville in the snow.
I did the same thing, and guess what? It's going to be just as snowy when you go to Villanova next year.
Yeah, hopefully a little less. Thank you. All right, can I start? Hello, Chair Hirsch, Dr. Jones, and members of the board. I hope everyone had a great break. My name's Mihir, and I'm the Student Body Vice President at Greenwich High School, and I'm excited to be back here to speak at the board. Recently in student government, we discussed new fundraiser opportunities, hoping to build off older and successful ones. The freshman and sophomore classes are brainstorming ways to bring their peers together through dodgeball tournaments for the 9th graders and a class Jeopardy game for the 10th graders. After successfully fundraising at the past few hockey games, the junior class are planning ahead for their Pi Day fundraiser on March 14th. Last year, this fundraiser saw many staff members, including our own school resource officer Wallace and Mr. Silkman, get pied by students in the student center during lunch. As for the seniors, we're hosting our annual Krispy Kreme fundraiser next Thursday on the 27th, right after school, hoping to do this successfully for one last time to cap off our senior year. Over this past month, we also successfully completed a cookie decorating event for Valentine's Day, which featured freshly baked cookies from Rocky and I. As you know, one of the most important goals for this year is school spirit, and one way we can maximize it is by attending many sports games. Postseason is coming up for many groups to cheer on, and that's what makes our school great, that we have so many teams to cheer for and show out in big numbers. Finally, I wanted to speak about the Greenwich Schools budget. We recently learned that students would lose valuable staff and course offerings if the budget is not fully funded. So many things are made possible through the resources available to GHS and our other schools, including smaller class sizes, more diverse courses, and more engaging activities, as well as better learning facilities. Our student government fully supports the Board of Education's budget for the next school year. Thank you for letting me speak, and I can't wait to get back to you guys next month.
Just make sure you get home safely in the snow. Next up is PTA Council. Is John here or John online?
John is online.
John, I think you're online.
Yep. Can you hear me? Hello? Wendy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Apparently we have the same problem.
Can,
Every time we lose you, I just turn you up on my laptop, so
you-
we can hear you.
maybe I should just dial in. Maybe that would be easier.
So Karen, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Chair Hirsch, BOE members, Superintendent Dr. Jones, everyone at CMS and online, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I was looking forward to this in-person experience, but a couple of sick kids at home altered my plans. I'm John Fisher, the Greenwich PTA Council President, parent of 2 of the 8,513 great kids in the Greenwich Public Schools. The PTA Council, in case anyone doesn't know, is the umbrella organization made up by and for the 15 independent PTAs in town. We have just under 4,000 PTA families in Greenwich who together spend more than $1.25 million annually and put in hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours to enhance the learning experience for every student and to support our teachers. As we are about to head into the final stretch in the budget marathon, we appreciate all the effort and time put in by the superintendent and her team, by Chair Hirsch and the BOE members, and everyone who's been involved. For the benefit of everyone listening, the next steps in the budget process are: on Tuesday, March 4th, the BET Budget Committee will hold their Decision Day meeting. And then on Wednesday, March 26th, the full BET will hold a public hearing on the school's budgets, starting at 7 p.m. at Central Middle School. Plenty of opportunity for people to speak up. That meeting is specifically to give everyone an opportunity to speak out to the BET about the school's budgets. PTAC urges everyone to attend and, if you feel comfortable, to speak at the BET public hearing for the school's budget. That's March 26th. Be there. Turning to the agenda, the PCG Special Education Review Report confirms that GPS has made significant progress and improvement in virtually all areas identified in the initial assessment. That's good. We commend the district and we recognize the hard and thoughtful work of Dr. Jones, Dr. Helligenthaler, the school administrators, and the teachers. But there's still work to be done, and I'm going to echo some of what Lil Perrone said. There's work to be done in staffing, in program consistency, in inclusion, behavior, and communications. And while this report assigns a consistent rating to the transparent staffing allocation model, we need to emphasize what is consistently reported on the ground, and some of what Lil said. There's ongoing staffing shortages, particularly around paraprofessionals and teachers who are struggling with increasingly demanding caseloads. These challenges aren't new and they aren't minor. They impact all students every day. Addressing staffing concerns and staff development must remain a priority. It is a budget priority, but it also goes beyond the budget numbers. It profoundly impacts whether students receive the support they need. We also must work hard to ensure we continue to encourage the Greenwich Public Schools' high academic expectations for all learners, from IEP goal setting to academic achievement in the classroom. Next up on the agenda, we look forward to hearing the pre-K presentation. Pre-K education, in addition to being mandated for many of our kids, is a great investment with social, academic, and life skills benefits for every kid who's able to access it. We hope to see the pre-K program continue to expand so that more kids and families can access it. We note the action item on the Riverside feasibility study, and we again urge the BOE to ensure that this continues to move forward expeditiously. We also note the action item on the proposal for the new GHS Modern Band Music course. The idea for this course is like an overnight sensation, like a good garage band. It seems to have come together spontaneously with innovation and with little or no money required. We applaud Mr. Police and the backing band of music teachers. And finally, we note the action item on tuition and fees. There were comments by BET members in the BET Budget Committee meeting just before the winter break that district fees should be increasing in line with taxes. That seems like an easy expectation to meet or exceed. With that, I thank you all for your public service and for this time to speak.
Thank you, John. Next up, we are moving to community comments. I'll turn it over to our secretary, Ms. Costin.
So we only had one speaker signed up, Hadrian Nobe. I don't see him in the audience, so if he's online, then
Yes, I'm online. Am I audible?
yes, we hear you, and I'll start the
Wonderful.
clock. You have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you. Hi, my name is Hadrian Nobe, and I'm a student. I'm a junior at GHS. I'm here one last time to talk about flex time and why I think that it, or at least something like it, is still kind of important for the GHS school community. At the last board meeting, a lot of seemingly lovely numbers about the elimination of flex time got shown. And I agree, based on these numbers alone, taking flex time away from students seems a great benefit. What's harder to quantify, however, especially with the stats provided in that report, is what GHS has lost during the transition. While it may be true that this year there are 66 more clubs than last year, it's also true that the barrier to entry to any of one of these clubs has been raised significantly. No longer can a student drop by one day and try out a hobby, try to see if they like something. I personally have seen a lot of clubs, while they may continue to be a statistic on the school roster, struggle to maintain members and struggle to maintain advisors. That's not even to mention the subtle but equally important effect of decoupling club schedules from the school block schedule. Rather than 8 distinct blocks of time that students were able to spend how they so chose, rather than 8 times that students are able to explore different hobbies, explore different things in a time when students should be exploring, students are basically unable to attend more than 2 clubs without being in 2 or 3 places at once. And even that's challenging if those clubs happen to be on the same day of the only 3 days that clubs are able to run, the only 3 days that the late bus runs. Not every club is a demanding commitment, and not every club should be. GHS should be making it a goal to be a space where students are able to have fun and to relax in a lower stress environment. And right now, that's simply not the case. That's what flex time was, and right now, that's what GHS lacks. When I was in elementary school, I had a recess. When I was in middle school, I had lunch. But at GHS, there are a lot of kids at GHS, and there's simply not a time when all of the students are able to know that everybody will be free. Everybody will be able to talk to them or have a teacher who can give them extra help or any of that things. 30 minutes of the school day, whether it be in the middle of the day or at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, seems a fair cost for a better and more vibrant school community. As I was mentioning, academically, flex time was really useful, especially for students with other commitments outside of school. If the only option is for a student to stay after school to make up a test or something like that, that's difficult for a lot of people, and GHS really shouldn't be putting needless difficulty upon students.
30
Removing time where students are able to have basically time for themselves is a bad idea if GHS wants to be a vibrant community. It wants to be a place where students can interact and work academically. In the past, difficulties with flex time were associated with students not using the time wisely. But if the flex time was placed in the middle of the day or something like that, I think that it would be an excellent solution and kind of help every student at GHS. And I urge the board to consider taking this track. Thank you.
Thank you. Right on time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Adrian. Next up is the superintendent's report.
Thank you. I just have a couple of items tonight. First of all, I want to just mention that on March 6th, we are hosting a community forum, and the forum is titled Combating Anti-Semitism Through Education. And that forum will start at 6:30. It will be at Havemeyer. And this was a request from some members of PTA to really have an opportunity to share all the work that we've done with our curriculum over the last really 12 to 18 months. So we're looking forward to that, and you'll see information in tomorrow's newsletter about that. Also, next week, our rising 9th through 12th graders will be enrolling and getting ready for next year. We have automated that process this year for the first time, so really excited about that. And we encourage all of our parents to join in with their students and really look at how the online enrollment portfolio actually works. And then I also just want to mention that next week, on Wednesday is the evening for our rising ninth graders, and they will be touring the high school at 5:30, and then there will be the information in the PAC Center at 6:30. So that's a really important night for our rising freshmen. But lots going on, lots of excitement and success. So that's all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Now we're up to committee reports. Anybody have a committee report that they'd like to start with? Ms. Costin?
I would just like to encourage anybody who has a special educator that they find goes above and beyond to please nominate them for a Distinguished Teacher Award. You have until March 6th, I believe, to submit a packet with your nominations. As far as CMS, I am the board liaison to the CMS Building Committee, and if you haven't driven by to see all the work going on, please do so when it's light out so you can see all the progress.
Just to clarify, I know you said if you have a special educator, we're talking about all educators who who are fantastic and special that you'd like to nominate, not one who simply works in the special education field.
No, a special.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, an outstanding educator.
Thank you. for that
Para,
clarification.
instructional coach, any educator in our schools.
Does anybody else have a committee report? No, no committees?
I have
Kathleen?
one.
All right, Wendy, you're after Kathleen.
Go ahead, just real fast. Greenwich Alliance next Friday is the trivia night.
Fantastic. Well, every year we talk about doing a team. We should really discuss it. Okay, Wendy.
I just wanted to give a quick update on the JC Building Committee. And we did go out to bid in the fall, and we received 3 bids, and we ultimately awarded the bid to Tomlinson Hawley Patterson, THP, as a general contractor for the project. And they began preliminary site work over Christmas break, and they just completed some initial remediation and work for the elevator over the February break. And the majority, if not all of the work, will be completed during the upcoming summer break. And now our committee is turning its focus to phase 3, which is going to focus on the cafeteria. And we've begun our preliminary schematic design and narrowed the current focus to modernizing the current cafeteria, where we're going to be utilizing currently unused space and modernizing the function of the kitchen and service area. And also we're able to design an ADA compliant and highly functional cafeteria serving current and expected enrollment without an expansion at this time. Our goal is to have our budget and plan solidified so that we can complete construction, documentation, and time to go out to bid in August, awarding the bid for phase 3 in the fall of 2025, so that we can aim to complete phase 3 during the summer of 2026. And we also plan to lay out a preliminary design concept of an expansion, which might be needed in the future, as was outlined in the original ed specs, if enrollment trends change, or if redistricting or preschool plans require more space at JC in the future. So the preliminary plan will include room for both more cafeteria space as well as potential for more classroom space if there becomes a need in the future. So that's my update.
Thank you, Wendy. I was to say, we met with EMAC this week. So that was a very interesting meeting, and we went over quite a bunch of different details in regards to areas of the town, including discussions on Central Middle School, New Lebanon, and Hamilton Avenue. So it was very educational, and I look forward to hearing more from that committee as we move forward in our different projects. And I would also like to note, I have to change the record, when Ms. Vizzo Walsh was having, we were having sound problems earlier when we were discussing the consent agenda. She did not vote no. She abstained from the vote. So I need to adjust the minutes for that as well going forward. So with no other committee reports or updates, we can turn this over to discussion items and the PCG Special Education Review.
And Dr. Miller will invite you to come forward. And if you want to introduce Jennifer number 2, since she is new to us, we'll let you do that. But before you start, I do just want to say, while Lil's online and watching, they absolutely did what they said they were going to do and did those visits. I did their schedule because they didn't know the district. And it was a very tight schedule going across the district and really looking at proximity of buildings so that we had very little travel time in between. So I thank them for the work that they did, and it is amazing how many classrooms that you got into. So thank you.
And to note, it wasn't just one individual doing all of those visits. So I think that's another key thing to note.
Excellent. I
I'll
think
turn
we
it
have a
over.
PowerPoint that hopefully should be coming up as well. Great, thank you. Members of the board, Dr. Jones and the Greenwich community, thank you for having us here on a very snowy night for Greenwich. We're happy to be here to provide the summary of our findings from the last report and the progress made by the district in the last few years. I'm Dr. Jennifer Meller. I work for Public Consulting Group and have been the consistent face since 2020 in studying the district, providing feedback to you, meeting many of you on little tiny virtual screens over the past couple of years. And I want to do some introductions. We can move on to some of the next slides around the team and our agenda for tonight. We'll introduce ourselves and then provide a overview of the approach that we took for this updated review, provide a high-level summary of the findings, and then the conclusion and recommendations. You have a summary of, you have the actual report that's been made public. We're going to touch on very high-level findings tonight, but really the details provided in that report. Next slide. As I mentioned, I've been the consistent face throughout this project, but I am joined by my other colleague, the other Jennifer, Dr. Jennifer Baribeau, who provide fresh eyes and a fresh perspective and is also a Connecticut resident. So it's close to home for her and can really see this work and the work of the district through a local lens. We're also joined by Mina Cow, who has been our support on the project management and data collection side. Not with us tonight, but certainly was a key part of the way that we've operated this project.
And I was going to invite board members, just in case you want to see the presentation behind me, you can sit in front seats. Just
I'm a visual learner, so for me, I would move. So if you need the time, go right ahead to move. So just to recap, we started this work in the 2020-2021 school year. As we all remember, what a challenging time we were in during that time frame. So we did classroom visits, but we did them virtually. So it's a very different perspective now, and I think we were able to add a lot more color and insight, particularly to see the growth over the past couple of years. We provided 28 recommendations. It was a lot. It was a lot to manage. And as I've gone through this process of the writing of this report, it was such a reflection on the things that we studied and what a different time and place Greenwich was in when we started that work. We stayed on through the next year to help guide the development of the action plan. We led some training around universal design for learning. And then we did a similar report to the one that you have in front of you that started to assess the progress made just after 1 year. So that was really the benchmark. And then this year, when we came back, we were looking at implementation from not just that first year, but to years 2 and 3. So when you see in the report, it was important for us to show the real progress, where things started, and where things are on the variety of recommendations. In terms of our overview, this should look familiar. I talked about this in the fall as to what our objectives were with this work. Number one was to evaluate the implementation of the recommendations. That in order to do that, we had planned to interview key stakeholders, review documentation, and observe practices in classrooms to verify the status of the recommendation implementation. We did all those things, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The second piece was to measure progress and outcomes. So really to collect the data that showed and verified, not just what people were telling us, but we could see it in writing, we could see the trainings, we could see the documented progress on each of the initiatives. And also identify remaining gaps and challenges. This work is never done. This work is always in progress. New students come, new things happen, new initiatives are underway. And so our goal here was to really show that progress of what happened from 2020 to now, and provide some guidance around how to move forward from here. Even if a recommendation was rated as consistent and at the top level, you'll see in the definition of it, we highlight that this is a continuous improvement cycle. It will always be something to keep revisiting and assessing if that progress is still at the same spot year after year. And then finally, our goal was not to provide 28 new recommendations, but to help refine further where we see progress still could be made and areas that maybe have emerged that need additional either study or reflection for the district moving forward. In terms of our methodology, we launched the project in the fall. I presented to you virtually on what we were planning to do. We finalized all of our focus group and interview processes. We put together, along with Dr. Jones' help, the classroom visit schedule. And in that phase 2 in the fall, we did a number of virtual focus groups and interviews, really with a cross range of folks in the district, teachers, administrators, central office staff. We did visit 80 classrooms. That really was something that we did. I had my sneakers on. We both did those couple days. And we collected documents and data to assess, as I said, not just what people were telling us, but to triangulate what we were hearing with what we were seeing on paper. And then we spent the last month or two analyzing, writing, reflecting, and refining that draft so that we would have the final report for you and present to you this evening. In more depth, on the next slide is the quantitative side. So we reviewed 75 plus documents and elements of data, quite the number when you think about the progress and all the artifacts that a district could produce in a 4 to 5 year time period. We had 15 sessions with approximately 135 attendees. I will say some of those are folks who were in 2 groups depending on their role. So these were unique participants. Unique participant number would be slightly less. We wanted to count the fact that we had that many people in focus groups talking to specific topics. And then the classroom visits, as I said, we did each go to between 6 and 7 schools in a 2-day time period. And in some cases, we spent a lot more time in one class. In other cases, we were observing a teacher working with one student one-on-one. So it would have been a little bit less time. But we really did. Our intention was to see as many classes and as many modes of instruction in the course of the day as we could. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Baribeau, who's going to take us through the summary of findings, and I'll come back up for the last part of it.
I'm a little bit shorter than Dr. Miller, so I'm going to adjust the mic here. But good evening, everyone. I'm going to take us through the summary of findings for this report. And what I want to highlight here, and what most of you have probably already seen, was from our first report, which was largely looking at the special education effectiveness domains. And so what you'll see here is that we've developed this framework. It's a research-based framework to help districts really assess and improve special education programming. And it really is intended to enhance outcomes for all students. It does support compliance, but it also drives student success through integrated multidisciplinary strategies that are highlighted in these 6 domains that you see here. And so what you'll see is that for this report as well, when I walk through the summary of findings, they're aligned to these domains again, which is how the recommendations were set up in the report. For this part here, as Dr. Miller mentioned, we did this for the status findings that were done a few years ago. And so what you see here are implementation levels. And so we have a range starting at beginning, which would be number 1, the yellow circle, all the way up to fully implemented number 5. I think it's important to know that we assessed the progress of Greenwich through this and implementing those recommendations from that first report. I want to highlight here as well that when we said consistent, and I know Dr. Meller mentioned this, we're highlighting the fact that it is a continuous improvement cycle. And what we highlight in the beginning of the report is that what we see in this work is that there's been a lot of technical elements that have been accomplished. And where we're pushing the district now is to move into some of those adaptive components. So when you hear us talk about professional development and some focus group feedback about a one and done, it's not that professional development hasn't been rich, right, with a lot of opportunities for staff, but really how are we taking it now to the next level? And so I'll talk a little bit about that when we go through the ratings for each of the findings that we had here in the summary. The other element here that I want to highlight before we dive into the summary of findings is the context, as Dr. Meller already talked about a little bit, but just where we noticed that GPS has made significant progress in implementing each of these recommendations from the audit. When we looked at the baseline state of special education at the time of the original review, there was challenges with relationships between parents and the school. They were strained. There was a lack of trust. Students were often caught in intervention cycles, so it was always challenging when you look at that first report to really understand when a student was being referred for an evaluation or how they were moving fluidly through those intervention cycles. Specialized programs did not exist at the time, and the district really did lack systems such as those needed to transparently monitor out-of-district placement settings and allocated staff in a manner that was consistent with student need. So there was some real systems work that needed to happen, and you'll see as we go through the summary of findings that we believe from what we've reviewed that those systems have been put in place. And so we want to note that these improvement efforts have been marked by transparency with stakeholders. So there's been stakeholder involvement throughout this process. There's been a focus on capacity building. So again, really thinking about how do we look at this for the long term, and then an unwavering commitment from staff. So we want to highlight that everybody has been a part of this work and everybody has been helpful in helping us get to this point of thinking about the findings of where you currently are. For this first piece here, you'll see the domain of learning environment and specialized services. And in the original report, this was the area that we had the most recommendations. There were 13. And so this table here shows that summary of progress from that domain about learning environment and specialized services. You'll see in the following slides that we're going to highlight some key milestones in this area and how we came to the ratings for progress. As you can see here, GPS has made progress in almost all areas from our status findings in 21 to 22, and several areas have moved into consistent, while others are still partially implemented, but have seen some progress. However, again, I want to highlight that when the initial report came out, almost all of these areas were in the beginning phase, as you can see here from the yellow circles. And so this does highlight that concerted effort that we've been talking about, that the leadership team has made in developing stronger practices within the learning environment and specialized services domain. And so the first one that we want to highlight here as a key milestone is that GPS has successfully implemented a consistent framework for MTSS, and they've worked with aligning those practices across schools and grade levels. So throughout our focus groups, we heard many stakeholders describing this new process and new system as beneficial for moving students more fluidly through intervention cycles, that there's been greater collaboration among teams with this new MTSS system in place, and that there's been more access to supportive tools such as the district's MTSS manual and an intervention flow chart to help teams really think about when to move students through the intervention tiers. The second milestone here is around UDL and really looking at how the inclusion specialist has played a key role in supporting PINE teams, which we noted are now at every elementary school through professional development, while also providing those resources and strategies to help all schools really access the district effectively and integrate all these UDL strategies into the classroom. So the inclusion specialist has been supporting district-wide, and those UDL strategies are really starting to be seen in the classrooms. We noticed this when we were on site as well. There were model classrooms that we went into that had some excellent examples of what UDL would look like in practice. We highlighted that in the report as well, and just thinking about where the district is currently and where they can continue to move forward in having this be a more consistent practice across all classrooms. The next milestone was around timelines. And so we want to highlight here a big milestone was that GPS achieved its goal of completing 98% of initial referrals within the 45-day timeline by this school year. This was a significant increase from its baseline of 71% in 21-22. So again, a big accomplishment there for the district. In addition to that, They've also established a specialized evaluation team with expertise in supporting bilingual students, as well as achieved the state targets for addressing disproportionality. So the risk ratio was reduced. The state's threshold is 3.0. When we were here originally, and the original report highlighted the fact that the district was over that threshold for identifying Hispanic or Latino students with intellectual disabilities. The state has now officially taken the district out of that disproportionality monitoring, and they've achieved that goal of reducing that under that 3.0 threshold. The next milestone is around co-teaching, and noting here that progress has been made with the co-teaching model, and investments in professional development have really helped teachers to build collaborative structures to support co-teaching. Now, we say that knowing that this is still a process that's being fine-tuned. We know the district is still working on logistical and structural challenges with this model, and it's mostly at the secondary level where we're seeing some of these challenges come to play. When scaling this model, it's been particularly challenging at the secondary level, but the district has created support tools to help. This is co-planning templates that we looked at, co-teaching models that are tailored to content areas, and a collaborative teaching rubric to support staff. And so while there is some work to still be done there have been some pretty comprehensive tools, we would say, that are helping teams to really think about their co-teaching practices. The next milestone is around the academic labs that we looked at. And so observations during our school visits showed great improvements in the academic lab compared to what we saw in the 2021 evaluation. Students were actively engaged when we were on site, and they were working on their IEP goals within these academic labs. We also want to highlight that the SMARTS curriculum was introduced, which is a comprehensive research-based curriculum that helps students with executive functioning. And so this has been a key area in helping really bring together that academic lab to be a useful time for students to really learn and work on their IEP goals. We also want to highlight that the Unique Learner Program was implemented during this time. And so the district has successfully launched this program, which provides specialized instruction to students in a more self-contained setting and allows more students to remain in district to receive specialized programming. While we note in the report that there are some opportunities to continue to enhance that programming, we already know that the district is working on some of these things. And so when we look at some of the instructional practices there, the district is working closely with AT specialists, with AAC specialists to really support that program and enhancing it a little bit more. The second area here or the third area rather, is the advanced placement and honors classes. And so while our data analysis shows the overall percentage of students with disabilities in APs and honor courses has decreased this past year to 34%, it was previously 41%. We note that over half of the students that are enrolled in AP or honors courses, 54% of them are in more than one honors course, which is a positive. And so what we see there is that of students with disabilities that are enrolling in those courses, they're taking more than one, which highlights that students are enjoying these courses, that are stepping up to the plate to really take some more rigorous coursework. And so we want to highlight that while the number has decreased, it is a positive trend to see that students are enrolling in more than one AP or honors class. And we also want to highlight that it's been a focus. It's going to continue to be a focus of having students with disabilities enroll in higher level or more rigorous courses by limiting the enrollment in less demanding courses. So something like practical biology is a course that will be either removed, we've been told, or limited the amount of students that will enroll in that so that students are encouraged to take more challenging courses. And then lastly, Twice Exceptional. The district has created a comprehensive 2E handbook that outlines the identification processes, strategies, and tools for supporting 2E learners, and a rollout plan has been put in place for training and professional development around this. Transportation was another area where the district introduced a new transportation request form, and we noted this in the previous status findings as well, but this is something that we still rated as fully implemented because this form is being used with clear step-by-step instructions for staff, and this form is part of a centralized submission process. And so when we did our focus groups for this round as well, it was well received by school personnel who believe it's allowed for a much more effective and efficient system in managing transportation requests. For assistive technology and AAC, the district currently employs a part-time assistive technology specialist and a contracted AAC specialist who have both supported with recommending tools, strategies, and conducting professional development for staff. And this has also been a major benefit to the Unique Learner Program, as I mentioned in the previous slide. While on site, we wanted to note that we also saw a wide range of AT supports for students, and this included high, mid, and low tech options. So we saw smart boards, iPads, we saw Snap and Read, co-writer, pencil grips, slant boards. From the previous review, the original review, this was an area of opportunity for the district, and so we wanted to highlight that even our on-site observations substantiated what we saw here with the support of assistive technology specialist and AAC specialist, and seeing these tools being used in the classroom. And then we also had out-of-district placements. And so we wanted to highlight here that the district has successfully reduced the number of out-of-district placements from 42 to 32 students as of this school year. And it's allowed for significant cost savings. And so when we looked at the budget around this, almost $800,000 was brought back into the district, which can then strengthen the continuum of services and supports offered within the district by reducing those numbers. The next domain I will walk us through is around leadership. And so the first milestone here that we want to highlight is around inclusive practices. And so again, going back to thinking about how the district has embedded UDL and inclusive practices as part of a larger vision for all schools. This was through hiring an inclusion specialist to really advance these efforts district-wide. And many staff have felt this addition has been extremely helpful to them in supporting their work. There are some parts of the continuum that need further refining. We heard a lot about the wellness program at the high school, and staff feeling that just a greater understanding of the best ways to support students across the continuum would be helpful so that they can make sure students are receiving the appropriate supports. This was expressed not only by staff, but by parents and focus groups as well. The second milestone here is around organizational structure and roles and responsibilities. So while we did not see any changes that need to be made to the current organizational structure and feel the changes that have been made are appropriate, one area that we did want to highlight here was the clarity of the role of case managers in the district. And so there's currently a lack of a consistent understanding in the responsibilities of this role, which has led to some confusions of expectations for staff. And so that was still an area that we feel the district should look a little more closely at. The next domain is high expectations. And so the two milestones here that we wanted to highlight were the commitment to rigor and inclusive practices. And so again, our classroom observations revealed evidence of grade level and age-appropriate instruction occurring. Students were engaged in learning, and we saw evidence of rigor in many of the classrooms that we visited. We know here, when we looked at this closely and looked at all the data, that the district continues to make this a focus through professional learning opportunities and a toolkit of strategies for specially designed instruction. This is coming in response to some staff that have requested more PD and training on how to make sure students with disabilities are receiving their individualized supports within a general education setting. And this is specifically for students that may not be in a co-teaching classroom model. Staff also felt that in addition to this, that having some type of walkthrough tool and additional coaching could help them to understand areas in which they could improve their practice when you think about rigor and standards aligned instruction for students with disabilities. The next domain area is around human capital. And here we want to highlight the PD plan that was put in place. Our review of documents shows that there has been a developed PD plan for addressing the diverse needs of general and special education staff. This includes training on inclusive services, IEP development, assessments and evaluations, social emotional learning, specialized instruction, assistive technology, UDL, DBT for mental health, and Orton Gillingham for literacy. And so we want to note that there's been training for co-teaching and IEP goal writing in addition to this that aligns with grade level standards for staff and implementation support for PINE teams that also have a strong focus on UDL. And so while we highlight that there has been a robust PD plan that's been put in place, we do again want to bring back that conversation we were having around moving it into that more adaptive piece. And so staff have received training, but what they're saying is they feel we want more coaching or additional ways to really implement these practices, as one PD session did not always relate to a shift in their practice. And so again, we see that as a positive, that the PD's been delivered, but then really think about how do we take it to the next level and make sure that we're actually seeing it implemented in practice across classrooms. For systems and structures, we want to highlight the staffing model, and we want to emphasize that the district has rolled out a new and more transparent staffing model that uses a weighted caseload approach, which accounts for both direct and indirect service hours, as well as time for evaluations and PPT meetings. This has really helped staff with allocations of staffing and thinking about how to more closely align with student needs. Staff and focus groups reported a very positive perception with this new approach, and building leadership have been trained on how this model works to better support the needs in their building when they're considering their staffing allocations and student needs. And the policy and procedure manual came up in our first report, and we want to highlight here that the district's policy and procedure manual for special education is now publicly posted on the district's website and is updated regularly, with the last update to this manual being in August of 2024. The last part I will walk you through here of our milestone areas are around the family and community engagement areas of the domain. And so we want to highlight the parent-friendly resources that the district has developed and uploaded so that they're accessible to families. This includes guides for understanding IEPs and 504 plans, which again can all be accessed on the district's website now. The OSESS site has been set up to be a resource hub so that families can really go there and look for information about special education processes. This site is also regularly reviewed and updated, so it's not something that's put up once and then left alone. It's been being used as a tool that families can really access and get information that they need in real time. We also want to highlight the newsletter. This was in place and it's continued to be a part of the communication to families. And it provides staff and families with a way to really look at instructional practices going on in buildings, tips for supporting students at home, upcoming trainings for families, and any departmental news. The newsletter is called Together We Can, and it's really helped in our mind when we looked at this newsletter over the last several that have been posted to help create greater communication and community for families. And so you could see that there were fun nights for families. There were ways for families to access different trainings through this. And so we really felt it was a way to bring community together where that originally wasn't here when we were, when our first original report. And then lastly, around collaboration, we want to highlight how much the OSESS department has worked to develop more collaborative partnerships with both SEAC and PTAC to gather parent feedback and ideas for workshops for families. We heard this in focus groups as well, with parents having appreciated these changes. And I'm also asking for continued communication on events, particularly ones that can be provided by external experts, and any fees that parents would need to pay to attend these types of trainings when we talk to families about the trainings that they've attended. While parents, we will note, still feel there are areas where the district can improve, they did express through our focus groups immense gratitude for the leadership's commitment to change and engaging with them as meaningful partners in this process. And so again, while we know that this is always going to be an area, all of these elements of the domain of continuous improvement, we do want to highlight everything the district has done to really achieve these milestones. It's a lot to celebrate. It doesn't mean that the work is done, but it does mean that there has been a lot of progress that's been made since that 2020 report. I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Miller.
Doesn't matter. At the end of the action planning that we conducted in partnership with the district in the 21-22 school year, we created 6 indicators that have been publicly updated and considered as measures of success when we think about how far this plan has come in the past couple of years. We picked 6 elements because we wanted to develop a rubric and an understanding and benchmarks and goals around areas that were either going to contribute to showing progress across multiple recommendations, or that we felt if we could move the needle in one of these key areas, it would really be demonstrating overall progress for the district. So these included the state performance plan indicators. Dr. Barbo talked a bit about that, and I will a little more as well. Students with IEPs demonstrating growth towards standards in ELA and math. Initial referrals being completed within that 45-day timeline, increasing the continuum of program options for students with disabilities within the district, increasing access around advanced placement or honors courses for students with disabilities or identified as twice exceptional, and then also increasing parent communication and the effectiveness of it. I'm going to walk you through in the next couple slides the progress around these 6 indicators and our rating around whether or not they were met and what that looks like for success. So for the first one, this is the area around disproportionality. So indicators 9 and 10 are indicators that are measured not just at the state level in Connecticut, but are measured nationwide. These are the same indicators in every state, in every LEA, as to focusing on special education and ensuring that students appropriately are placed and identified in special education. So as Dr. Barbo mentioned, when we first did this report, there was an area that GPS was found to be disproportionate. That was, two areas around disproportionality for indicator 10. Hispanic students found eligible under the disability classification of intellectual disability. That was an area that was identified by the state at the conclusion of our report. So they found similar data to what we did. And the district has worked very hard to shore up those identification practices and the timelines and ensure appropriate identification was occurring through the evaluation process. So as of this September, the district was not been found disproportionate as a rating by the state in any of the components of indicator 9 or 10. So the indicator is met for success measure number 1. For number 2, I'll wait 1 second till it clicks over. There we go. I know there's a lot of text on here, so I want to make sure we are visually displaying it as well. So the indicator number 2 was for students with IEPs will demonstrate growth towards standards on English language arts and mathematics. This is certainly just one indicator of progress and the way that we look at academic success for students, one data point. But I will note that the district has partially met this indicator. Certainly in grades 11 or in grade 11 between ELA and math, you will see in ELA, the scores went down slightly, but in math, they increased. So these numbers align with, I know, data that you have looked at as a board in the past couple months. So certainly a good indication of some progress that is occurring and being illustrated through these achievement data. For indicator number 3, we spoke to this a bit already, but 71% of meetings met the 45-day timeline or evaluation timeline from referral to eligibility and IEP implementation. That was a number that was established in that in the report, in that 2021 year report. The target was 100%. That really is the standard that is a compliance indicator that's set by the state. That is expectation is 100%. There was significant progress. To move from 71% to 97.8% required significant structural changes, training, clarification, documentation for staff to know how to move the needle on that one. So while the indicator was not met technically, we do want to highlight what progress was made. And this is a very tough indicator for every district to meet. There are always going to be some circumstances where that 100% is very difficult to achieve. So this is a great measure of the progress made so far. For indicator 4, as a reminder, there were specialized programs were not in existence in GPS. So the fact that this initial goal was to develop and offer that continuum of programming really was the first step to determine which program should be created for which student profile and how would that occur, how would training occur, how would the classroom be set up. So the measure of that was if we set up programs within the district, we can reduce the number of students who are going out of district to perhaps have something they could find closer to home. So the indicator here is demonstrating that there was a reduction in the number of students in out-of-district placements, which to us is a measure of the fact that families are understanding the offerings within the district, and there's a commitment to being able to consider placements and to be within the district and to be growing specialized programs within the district. So in our assessment, the indicator was met for number 4. For number 5, this was also touched on earlier when we talked about the summary of findings. An indicator around increasing the access of students with disabilities participating in advanced placement and honors courses was selected because first of all, we could measure it. And second of all, it really was an indicator of how students could be accessing rigorous coursework in a new way or at with greater access. So the target was 50% by this September. As we mentioned earlier, the district did not meet that. We do know now that there are very specific plans in place in order to change that number. I think this, from what we understand, this data and this reflection was a really helpful understanding when you look at this calculation, and kind of going deeper as to what was preventing students from being able to enroll in honors or advanced placement courses if they had an IEP. And so while this indicator was not met, I think it was a reminder of how important it is to reflect on these data on a regular basis and to continue to understand what could be done to move the needle. For indicator number 6, this was focused on parent satisfaction. The target was 80% of students with parents of students with disabilities would report effective communication on a satisfaction survey. The district has moved to looking more broadly at all parents, and the entire parent survey, the district-wide parent survey that's now done on a regular basis, that was showing 89% of parent satisfaction. So even if you would extract students with disabilities and their parents responding, it's happening at a high rate and a much higher rate of satisfaction than had been before. So for our conclusion and for our recommendations, families and staff have noted progress. This was certainly a very key piece of the focus groups and of the staff that we talked with. There is notable progress. There is a feeling of progress, and that there is a stronger foundation on which to now springboard to the next level of what special education can look like in the district. Considering the starting point, it was really remarkable, the strides that were made in that short time frame, especially given the structural changes that had to happen across the board in so many areas. There are still inconsistencies in program quality across schools, delivery of what that looks like, communication with families can be uneven. And so our recommendation is really to consider a more cohesive and integrated approach into how that's assessed on a regular basis and how communication can continue to be demonstrated for families in a way that is clicking or clear for them. And while the district successfully laid a groundwork for improvement, we really do, as I said, believe that you're well poised for the next level of what that looks like of improvement, of continuing down this path, and really starting to synthesize what those important recommendations are in this next phase, and still maintain the progress that's been made to date. So it's about sustaining progress, but it's also more importantly about embedding these changes on a regular basis into the culture, and so that becomes second nature as to how you operate as a district specific to special education. So for our recommendations, we did align them back to the domains as well. There, like I said, aren't as many, but we do want to highlight conducting a deeper analysis of the Wellness Center and Windrose School. We were hearing various elements of confusion around some of these programs about how they're best designed to serve students with disabilities. And so that's one area that we would recommend going deeper into. Continuing to refine and to review and refine the Unique Learner Program. It's still very new. And so that any kind of new introduction of a program takes some time and reflection to ensure that those growing pains are alleviated and there's program quality and impact is assessed. We would also recommend continuing to build on that strong foundation of inclusive practices, and you'll see a variety of ways that we recommend doing that. Expanding the PINE framework across all levels to support broader access to inclusive education services and to UDL. We have really heard quite a bit about the impact of that framework and the support of that of PINE to be able to do that. And so really focusing in on something that works well and has showed progress is important. For the last few domains, we focused on, I'll wait till we get there. There we go. Family and community engagement, human capital, and leadership. Family and community engagement, as we've said, there's been such significant progress in this area, and yet the work is never completely done. There are always new families coming in, new teams that need to build partnerships, help parents understand what special education is and what services are provided, and then conducting a parent survey really around the progress, understanding of the progress made on the action plan, just to continue to get feedback on a regular basis. Defining clear roles for case managers, as we mentioned in the human capital area, continuing to elevate professional development. There are always new teachers coming in, always new staff that want to learn about new areas. So this is not just about that initial professional development, but really taking it to the next level around integrated practices and supporting in the classroom. And then finally, leadership. Developing a synthesized and streamlined action plan. So many of the components of the original action plan either have been completed or are underway enough that we would recommend taking a step back, reprioritizing, providing a new cohesive next level action plan that really will, as I mentioned, continue the progress, but take the district to the next level around implementing these recommendations. So with that, I know we shared a lot of information with you and we appreciate your attention tonight. We're open to answering any questions about our process or findings or recommendations from here.
I'm going to open this up to questions in a moment, but I did just want to say that I really wanted to thank you and the team, Jennifer, and the non-Jennifers, as well as our special education staff, Dr. Heigenthaler, Dr. Jones, and so forth. I've been working with you guys since day one on this, and it's really impressive. And I commend you and your staff for achieving so much in such a short window of time. Obviously, change takes time, especially when it's not just in practice, but when it's a mindset. So I'm really glad to see how many of the positives that your report had to share. And I'm sure a lot of the questions here are on the areas that we still need to have some movement and growth in. I know I personally have a few questions, but I'm going to open it up to others first. Does anybody have any specific questions they'd like to ask? Ms. Costin?
So I know you conducted site visits and you mentioned community connections as one of the places you visited, but there's no information on what you ascertained when you visited. And it's an area that, like the Wellness Center and Windrose, you've mentioned a deeper analysis, but you omitted community connections from your recommendations. Is there a reason why you omitted it?
It's because we know there have been changes with additional staff and a new model there that's still very new. So we did not think it warranted another deeper dive into that. It's certainly an area to continue to focus on, but we didn't feel that it would really rise to the level of a new, deeper recommendation.
Why would that be?
Because I believe that the changes are being made. There's more staff. It's a completely different model than it was. And I think it needs some time in order to really assess do significant more changes have to be made to it.
You think more changes need to be made?
No, I said to assess if more changes need to be made.
And then one other question. Did you do any parent feedback interviews in your visits?
We had focus groups. We had parent focus groups.
And were you happy to hear any specific highlights? Could you share with us?
So when we look at the data, we look at the full picture. And so when I think about individual groups and individual feedback around key areas, I think as a whole, yes, overall parents are feeling like there's momentum, that there's more progress being made. I think we heard the same thing with staff as well. There is a definite noticeable shift in the way that special education is perceived and the supports that are provided look different. There still are areas for improvement, which is why we have those additional recommendations. Families at times still do have questions, still do feel like communication is not enough, still do express concerns about what services look like for their child. I think as a whole, though, globally, it was a markedly different tone and a very different orientation that the parents we talked to, many of whom were the same, I should say, from a few years ago, was a definite shift in the way that special education is being viewed.
Just one other thing, you know, a lot of special education families, I don't know whether they're being asked, are the after school, if you're looking at the whole child and their experience in GPS, whether they're satisfied with the offerings for their kids after school. It's a huge thing for kids to have, after school activities, and whether students who have needs are able to really participate and access those kinds of very important activities. So if there is going to be a deeper analysis of how, how programming is accessed for those individuals, I think it would be really great to have sort of a review of our after-school activities, whether they're really inclusive for all children. And, I know that you're saying you think the program at Community Connections needs to stabilize a little bit, but same with our Unique Learner program. So I do think that it would, if we're going to continue with PCG, I think it would warrant really all of our programs, not just K-12. It has to really encompass all of our programming.
Thanks, Laura. Do you guys have any other questions? Ms. Behet?
Thank you so much for the work that you've done on this report. I just have two questions, particularly as it relates to our bilingual families. Can you tell me what your approach was in working particularly with the focus groups, aside from documents that could be translated into Spanish or other languages? And will a copy of this report be available for our bilingual families as well?
So as I recall, and we can go back to our notes to verify, I don't believe we had any bilingual families this time that were requesting support or requesting interpreters for those sessions. We did the first time around, so I don't believe we did this time. In terms of the report and documents, we provide the report to the district, and it's up to the district to determine if it's translated in what languages, how that will happen. So we obviously advocate for it to happen. I think it's an important way to provide access and information to families, but that's something that will be the district's decision. So Dr. Jones, I guess I'll defer to you on that process.
Well, again, I wanted to thank you, and I have a whole bunch of questions, but I was just going to start with two that I thought were kind of open and overall. You talked about two new programs that you thought were commendable. One was Pine, and the other was Smart's curriculum. Neither of which I've actually heard anything about. So I was, pleased to see that we are introducing new things that you're finding to be helpful and supportive for our students. But I was just wondering if you could give me a little more, information about both Pine and about Smart. As I said, it's the first time I'm really hearing about these, and I'd really like to know a little bit more about that. And then after that, I was just wondering between, Dr. Heigenthaler's here, also asking where those different, well, Pine I know is elementary, Smart I wasn't sure which grades it was being offered to and where, just when the program was introduced to staff and students, just out of curiosity.
Sure. Pine is the program for inclusion, neurodiversity education. It's our partnership with NYU. This is our third year in working with NYU and implementing this across our 11 elementary schools. We've been utilizing it for training for paras and other staff. We have access to NYU staff for office hours, as well as there's a platform of resources that's available to all staff. So each school has its own individual plan of how they're utilizing the resources with their staff within their schools. The SMARTS program is an executive functioning program that we piloted 2 years ago in the academic lab in the high school, and we got really good feedback. And then this year we were given a grant from the state that to be specifically used with high school age students. So we purchased it for all of the special education teachers at the high school level, as well as community connections, so that they would have access to that, their lessons that they can use with students in supporting executive functioning.
Executive functioning is probably one of the things that such a key thing to help success for all students, honestly. And I know that's something that there's a lot of programs that we do at the middle school through, some of the other programs we do. I'd love to see that a connection between that, because if we can help students at the middle school level with some of that executive functioning and cross things, by the time they get to high school, it'll be a lot easier for them to navigate through the much more rigorous programs, possibly AP and more honors classes. And that's another question I had. I know that prior to our implementation, some of the changes you guys had recommended, more students with learning needs were accessing our honors and AP courses than we're seeing now, even though they're taking more courses. And to me, it's as long as, I just wanted to find out, we were talking about having the options introduced and given to students more so, honors and AP courses move at a much different rate. They're not for every student. I don't necessarily believe the goal should be to have more students in those courses. I think the goal should be to have students accessing the courses that are the right courses for them so that they can feel success. But as long as they realize that there's access being given to them and that they have the opportunities to be in those rigorous courses, and if they're finding struggle to drop down. So, I don't know what you found in regards to speaking to parents or students in the regards that were they being given access to them and just finding that they wanted to stay on level.
This might actually be a good Dr. Jones question.
Thank you. You give me the easy ones. This is actually something that we've been really working on at the high school. And those of you that have high schoolers know that even with the automated enrollment, we've changed kind of how students will be able to select their class and really have a stronger voice in what they want to enroll in. Previously in the high school, we not only had prerequisites, but our high school had a lot of performance requirements. So if you wanted to take an honors class, even if you were in the right sequence, and for instance, you didn't have at least a B+, you might have had a B or a B-, you were really not allowed to take that class. Now, granted, we had an override process, which could be a struggle. And some students are, nervous to go through that process. We have parents that don't know how to navigate, the process. So what we've done this year, they still have a performance requirement, but it's at a C. And so when the parents see the classes that are available, the parents and the students will be able to decide what's best for them. And previously we didn't do that. And the only reason they went ahead and put a C after we talked about it a lot this year, this has been a big discussion, was, okay, if a student made a D, it doesn't mean they still couldn't take an honors the next year. Maybe they were out sick for 3 weeks. There may be good reasons, but we would want to make sure they had a good discussion with the counselor and that we're giving them the adult support at the high school. So it is a big change for us. And this will be the first year where they'll actually have much more choice than they've ever had before.
That's great. Like I said, I like to see our students being placed where they can succeed instead of struggle. So that's why I was asking that particular question. So, as long as they're aware that they have the opportunities and access, and if it's, right sized for them, so to speak. I had a couple of other questions, but anybody else? No, just me. Okay. I'll jump into some. Dr. Mercanti Anthony is unable to be here with us tonight, but I know he sent a few questions. I'm not going to read all of them, but one of the things you touched on that he and I actually both had some questions on were common planning time. So, you had said that the teachers are still saying that they don't feel that they have enough planning time, and I'm not sure how that's something that, we might be able to address. His question was about ensuring that they have that common planning time.
That's definitely something that we're aware of and that we're working on as we refine co-teaching. I know that I want to give credit to all three of our middle schools and the administration in trying to look at how through the schedule they can align that. There's team time and there's different times that people are meeting, and so they're trying to figure out how to work that into the time that's set in the schedule. Does it need to be a different time? So it is a work in progress, but it is something that we're very aware of and that is being worked on.
Thank you. He wrote also, the document speaks very thoughtfully about the progress and challenges of implementing UDL concepts across the district and classrooms, as well as the continuing need to develop rigorous and targeted IEP goals. He was wondering, what is the role for specialized instruction and where was this evidenced? What gaps did you see that surfaced?
I can take on some of this. Yeah. So UDL as a framework, and we always try to stress this, is not just a special education initiative. It's really a general education framework that reduces the barriers, right, to the classroom and to standards aligned instruction. Evidence as far as what we saw in IEP goals, we didn't look at IEPs, so it's hard to really say when we saw in classrooms what we saw as evidence of an IEP goal related to specialized instruction. They're really kind of two separate things in our minds when we look at this, but what we would say is that when it came to specially designed instruction, that was an area that teachers were requesting some more support in. And so when you were looking at those general education classrooms, teachers were saying, I want to make sure that we're providing those individualized supports or specially designed instruction to students to the best of our ability. And so we did see some evidence of that in our on-site visits where students were receiving accommodations or modifications as needed, but in other cases, it wasn't as easy to tell. And so that was one of the areas that we were saying around consistency is really making sure, one, at the core, right, where your high quality instruction is, that the UDL framework is woven into that, but at the same time, not losing sight of specialized instruction and what that means for students with IEPs and how you then find that balance between an IEP goal, bringing that in right to the general education classroom, and accommodations and modifications as well based on an individual student's IEP.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
I just want to add to that. I think one of the shifts, as we've talked about, our philosophy and inclusion of students is that we're doing more push-in services. So pull-out services, if I'm the single special ed teacher with my small group, I think our teachers are masterful and they know what specially designed instruction is in that setting. It's the shift into the classroom of what does that look like when I'm trying to provide that while the teacher is providing the instruction and how my role in that. And so we've been working with that. So that is a challenge, but that's new and it's growing. And so as we move in that, that's something that we've been working on, but that's where I can definitely see and, hear from our staff, and we're trying to provide that support and how to do that. So it's a shift in how we're providing services over the last couple of years.
I'll let you jump in, then I have a.
Yeah, this is just a
Whatever, yeah.
follow-up specifically to that. I'm just wondering how much pushing into the classroom is constrained by the physical limitations of some of our classrooms, because we have such different buildings, and I know some of them were really designed for co-teaching model and stuff, and then we have other classrooms. So is that part of the issue, or does that interfere with it at all? Like if you have a very small classroom, for example, or.
I don't know that anybody has brought up the size of the classroom as a barrier. I do know that we have some odd-shaped classrooms in some of our buildings that we're utilizing. I think it's more to do with a change in role, and our special educators are very highly trained individuals, and it's how to move into being that special education teacher when there's another teacher in there. And they are not paras, and our paras are wonderful, lovely people. So this isn't anything about that, but as our special ed teachers are trying to fill their role, they're like, we're not a para, we're a teacher. And yes. And so it's how do you do that specially designed instruction, and how is that different than when a para pushes in? And so that's where that struggle is.
And I guess I'll just end on this one other particularly, the thing that concerned me, and I know you mentioned before, was staff was talking, when our staff says that they have found a lot of helpfulness and support in having some of the training and professional development and the other pieces, the lack of consistency is still a big concern for them. And they talked about the need for more targeted and collaborative training. That and when we were looking back at some of the goals in the IEP, under IEP, that so I'm a little concerned that, without staff having targeted training and professional development to help support the creation of a strong IEP, it concerns me that how do we then expect the students to meet those and exceed the goals that are in their IEPs? If staff still needs more targeted training. And I think so that leads to the question also that Dr. Mercanti Anthony had, which was, sorry, he was like, he wished the recommendations on page 6 spoke more specifically about special education instruction. And he was hoping to see what you, as our consultants, might see as still being necessary to move the needle on student achievement. And, for me, it's also about meeting those, providing our teachers what they need to help our students meet the goals and exceed those in their IEPs as well.
I'm just going to jump in with a technical piece on that first, is that to remember that when this started from now, we switched IEP systems. We're still, I hate to say it's like CT SEDS made me do it, but there are definitely some technical things. And so as we look at some of the struggles, some of it has to be done with the system. And even just as recently as January 1st of this year, there's a new technical element of aligning the standard and the goal. So there is
So the state still hasn't gotten their act together. They rolled it out, I know, ahead of having it all actually done properly.
So I think our staff write really good goals and they're on the right track, but every time we get on the right track, there's then a shift and then we're relearning. So yes, do we have work to do? Yes. But I also want to appreciate the technical aspect and commend our staff for the great goals and the great IEPs they do write in like the difficult situation we're in.
Well, then maybe we can add a little asterisk in the report because there was no mention really of the difficulties with this. I figured the state had finally got it done, properly. But, so I'm interested to hear what recommendations you guys have for, looking at, improving and achieving, moving the needle for student achievement for students here.
I can take that's a big question because there's so many pieces, right, that impact that in my mind when we start just with MTSS alone, right? So when you look at your core curriculum, that's your number one piece. We always say, special education is only as good as general education. And so that's a big piece of this in my mind, in looking at past reports and reflecting on all of the data that we collected. It brings me right back to what I was saying earlier about that technical piece versus the adaptive piece. And I feel like you could put every system in place, but if the culture and the mindset hasn't shifted yet or is still in progress, you're going to have barriers or bumps in that road, right? And so in my mind, I feel like that is the next shift, right? It's really embracing what does inclusion mean? What does co-teaching really look like in a classroom? And how do we bring that together as a general education teacher and a special education teacher? I don't know that it's necessarily about buying a curriculum, right? I think we get so caught up in, is this the right curriculum where it really is, are we delivering instruction in the way that we need to for students at their individual level, at their individual need? And so I feel like when we look at this, the district is poised, right, for that next level in my mind to shift that mindset of saying, okay, we have the technical pieces down. We have the systems in place. Now we need to move to the next adaptive piece of this and really shift how we approach students with disabilities, how we think about them in our classrooms, how we work together as teams, and really think about how these are all of our students. And I think then you will start to see some of those shifts, I think, in some of the achievement and practices that are happening from my lens. I don't know if you have anything else to add, but that's kind of where it's a big question. There's never an easy answer to that, but that's where my mind goes when I reflect on everything that we've looked at so far within the district.
Well, I know you guys have been with us for a long time this evening. We have another bunch of stuff on our agenda to get to. And so, I wanted to thank you and I would love to have a deeper dive maybe, because I don't want to go through all of these technical questions here, but just as an aside, in discussion, the conduction of a deeper analysis of the Wellness Center and Windrose, I really would, and I know you said it's too early to add community connections because they're making some changes. I would like to add community connections to that still, even if it is just to understand some of the changes that you've already seen taking place and where you expect those to go, because our oldest learners, they have the shortest window of time at that stage, right? And so when we're looking at things like our younger students, we have time, but our oldest students, especially at Community Connections, truly need that support. And every day that goes by that we're missing opportunities there for some reason or another, those are missed opportunities that they may not get back. So I really would love to have a little bit, just to see what, not tonight, obviously, but what you saw there and some of the changes that you saw and what we can do to help support our oldest learners as well as our youngest.
Just so Dr. Miller is not going, oh my goodness, what are you asking us to do? We would have to work on some sort of contract extension, which is fine if we want to continue our work with PCG, because they have fulfilled by doing what they're doing tonight, what we actually contracted for. So I just don't want to set unrealistic expectations because it does involve budget. But certainly we welcome their input, and we would welcome us extending their work with us, because it's really helpful for us to have independent feedback.
That's a discussion we can have on another night, but even if it's just some of the notes that you guys had seen already, not a deeper dive at the moment. But anyway, I just wanted to thank you guys for the time and effort and working with all of our staff and being so respectful of all of our stakeholders in this process, and just, appreciate all the time you've spent with us over the years.
Thank you.
Dr. Huggenthaler, I don't think you're supposed to go anywhere. Aren't you doing pre-K? Come on up. We're going to talk
Dr.
about our young,
Jones.
we just talked about our oldest briefly, but now we're going to talk about our youngest.
And Dr. Jones is going to come on down with me.
And we do have, do I have to push the button, Anthony? Okay. And we do have a PowerPoint again, so you can either stay where you are. And we have about 20 slides tonight. And this really is, when we say preschool, it's about preschool space. And this was an outgrowth of a request from the Board of Ed from our last meeting, as we were discussing the ed spec for Riverside. And also just a few reminders about historical growth. So just as a reminder, this is language straight from the Connecticut State Department of Education. And this is just a reminder that early childhood special education, as defined by federal law under IDEA, is required for 3, 4, and 5-year-old children with disabilities who require special education. So this is very, very different than what you find just out in a community pre-K, where parents just want to send their children to pre-K. This is required, again, for children who require services that are 3, 4, and 5 years old. This is why we're grappling with some of the challenges. If you go back to 2012, 2013, and you look at how our growth has been in pre-K, we have more than tripled in our students who are being found eligible, again, by federal law, which means that we need more classes, we need more classroom space. The far right, where you see the 149, is where we anticipate will be at the very end of the year. As a reminder, pre-K, we are enrolling all year long. As children turn 3 years old, if they've been found eligible, they start when they're 3, and we will still find children eligible between now and June. So one of the questions that I get is, why do we use a ratio of typical developing peers and children with special needs? And it's really, when you look at that top heading, it's about least restrictive environment. And when you look at the federal language, what we're really talking about here is that our children who are in pre-K should be in a classroom with also children with who are typically developing peers. And what you're looking at right now is some of the federal language. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Mike. So what's in bold on that second bullet, the department states that regular class includes a preschool setting with typically developing peers. So I've been asked the question since I've been here, just recently, actually, why can't we just have a pre-K only for children who have special needs? We would not be following the law. So our classes must be balanced, and that's why we use the ratio. So this is what we look like in our preschool. We have 15 students who are in a classroom, and the goal is to have 9 peers and 6 children with special needs. And that is the ratio that we use in Greenwich. And I'm going to break this down simply because for some people this is a new concept. So if you just look at it where if we just said we had 5 classrooms, if we went back to 2018, 2019, our ratio only had 4 children with special needs in a classroom. So those 5 classrooms could hold 20 children with special needs plus your peers. By changing the ratio to 6 children, what we were able to do, if you still had 5 classrooms and you could fit 6 in each one of those, you now, with the same amount of classrooms, can service 30 children with special needs. And that is one reason that we changed the ratio, was to run more efficiently and also to be able to slow the growth a little bit so that we could manage and not run out of space. And this is what we've looked like going back to 2018-19. And I picked 2018-19 because a BET member had asked me about a pre-K question that they wanted to know what we look like in 2018-19. So if you go back to 2018-19, you'll see we already had 14 classrooms. And that year we had added 3 just to get through June. So when I actually started in July, we had 14 classrooms, 14 teachers contracted, ready to go in 2019-2020. And as part of our budget discussion that year, we changed the ratio going into 2020-2021. And you'll see we actually went down a classroom and went to 13. And we didn't hit 14 again until the end of 22. And then at 22-23, we started with 14 and then we went to 15 later that year. So we were able to manage 4 years of growth without adding a preschool classroom by adjusting our ratio. We are now, when you look at 2024, 2025, at 17 classrooms. We were only budgeted this year for 16.5. That means we were supposed to start with 16 and in February add classroom 17, but we had too many children who qualified this year and we started with 17. So I do want to note, if I have pre-K teachers watching, we are running above that ratio this year. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Right now we have the 9 peers, but we're running 7 to 8 children with special needs. And part of that is we are space challenged in the middle of the year. The building where we were going to plan to add a pre-K looks like now it's going back to 4 sections. Some of our buildings have a lot of kindergarten enrollment next year. So those rooms that we were going to use, we can no longer use. And so we are having to kind of hold on, and we also don't want to overhire, where at the end of the year, when all these children who are 4 and turning 5 go to kindergarten, now we've got an additional teacher. But space right now became the real challenge in February. So what are some of the pre-K space challenge considerations? It really is, where do we have elementary classrooms available for pre-K? Looking at safety, particularly fire code considerations, and the child development in general. So this is the utilization chart of all of our elementary schools, which we presented actually at the BET meeting just over a week ago. Right before the break. And what you'll see is it's pretty well all yellow and green because we are utilizing our buildings at a very, very high percentage. We would love to see more buildings or a few buildings at least at 85%, which means you have room to grow. We really don't have that. And I want to say thank you to Ben Brannion, who actually worked on this year, which was wonderful. This is about the 3rd year we've had this chart. But if we go to the next slide, he added a new component, which I thought was fantastic. And it's really showing where are some of those specialty rooms and how they're being utilized for things like ALP and special ed and foreign language. And every building is a little bit different according to the space that they have. So when we look at our space challenges from a safety consideration, not just that we don't have empty rooms all over the district, but pre-K must be located on the bottom floor for easy vacating in case of an emergency. And let's just talk very briefly about why. It goes back to 1958, and there was a very tragic fire at Our Lady of Angels School in Chicago. The building was a 1910 era building, like many buildings that we have. They have a lot of wood inside. And when that building caught on fire, there were things that didn't happen. For instance, the fire alarm could be heard on the first floor, the second floor it didn't go off. The fire alarm did not actually ring at the fire station. They had fire doors that were propped open. And from this tragic fire, they lost 92 children that were all on the second floor and 3 adults. And that is really why we have the National Fire Protection Association Model Code. Almost every state follows this. And again, this building also was not sprinkled. But it did impact and has impacted all of the fire drills that we do. Everything that we follow in the schools is an outgrowth of this 1958 tragic fire. So what does that mean for pre-K? It means that younger children must be on or closer to the ground floor, and that is to make evacuation easier. And classrooms for preschool, kindergarten, and first grade must be located on the level of exit discharge, which means they must be able to get out of the building on a ground level. And classrooms for second grade can be located no more than 1 floor above. But this is about pre-K. That's why when we say it's hard to find a room is often because pre-K, first grade, or kindergarten, they all need to be on the lower floor. So we have to be pretty particular about what rooms we use. It's also a reason why you can't take a building like Julian Curtis and just say, let's make it a preschool. Half of the building, the second floor, couldn't be used. So when we look at where we do have single egress around the district, just to put it in perspective, which means almost every classroom could be utilized. New Lebanon was built really well with a 2-level egress. So the top floor where the main office is can vacate right to the parking lot. On the lower level, they can vacate right out to the actual park. So even though it's a multi-floor building, it still has egress straight outside on both levels. Glenvale can get out on 1 level, Parkway is 1 level, and North Street is 1 level. The other 7 elementary schools are limited in the lower floor classrooms for pre-K use because they are multi-story in Greenwich. So let's look at where our current pre-K locations are. They are located predominantly on the west and the central portions of the district. So this is just a map where you can see on the west side, we have 8 preschool classrooms. In the center, or the central, we have 7. And on the east side of Greenwich, we have 2 classrooms. And the number of classrooms at each school is up there on the right-hand side. One of the reasons that we were recommending Riverside is, again, if you look at that east side, if you have a child who qualifies for special education in preschool and you're at ISD or at North Mianus, Riverside, OG, you don't have the flexibility. You're going to have to go to the center or to the west in order to get a pre-K unless you happen to have a seat at Old Greenwich where there are 2 classrooms on the east side. So when we look at the future, and again, it's just what are different operations for the future expansion that we would have for preschool. And when we talk about the Riverside Ed Spec adds to pre-K, we could go with that option. When we look at Julian Curtis, we already have an approved Ed Spec right now that adds 2 classrooms for preschool. The board voted on that Ed Spec, and then the project was not fully funded. It was piecemealed at the end of the year with an elevator, the entrance. But if you look at the Ed Spec, it does have 2 pre-K classrooms already approved. And the board reaffirmed that following August that, in fact, that Ed Spec is the Ed Spec they believe was right for the district. We could get to a point where we are renting space, just like we do for Windrose. We could change class size and go up slightly. We don't recommend that. 15 little bitty kiddos is a lot. We could change the ratio again. The minimum that we can go by what the state expects would be 50-50. So if you had 16 students, you could have 8 and 8. But that's kind of like saying instead of having 24 or 26 fifth graders, we're going to go up to 30 or 32. I mean, these are young children. So going to a 50-50 ratio is absolutely not ideal. And we're asking our teachers to do a tremendous amount. We could displace programs to capture space, which means, you're moving an art teacher out of the room to go to art on the cart. There are always things like that that you can do, but again, it impacts the quality of instruction. And then some have recommended that we go to an early childhood center. That would mean building an entirely new early childhood building. And I will just point out that Wendy had set some great questions, and there's a Q&A in your packet. And, one of the things is we were pulling how pre-K works around this area is most places that have built an early childhood center, what you'll see is they still have classes out in the schools because they outgrow them. Norwalk just opened their early childhood center in 2016, and they're dismantling it next year and going back out to the buildings. And part of the reason for that is it's very expensive to have an entire early childhood center. You still need basically a principal. They usually call them a director of early childhood. You need the office staff because you have to have an entrance. You need all the things you would need for an elementary school. And when you think we have 17 classrooms, we have more classrooms of pre-K than what we even have like at a Parkway or a JC for children. So I will leave it there, and I'm happy to answer questions. But again, I think Wendy did send some great questions that give you a little bit of numbers, and that is in your packet tonight as well. Thank you.
I'll give you, a moment for everybody to come back and sit down, but I'm open to questions. Cody?
Could, and I apologize if some of these are in Wendy's questions because I haven't seen those. Could you go through just the origin, or what we think the origin is, of the rapid increase of the number of special ed students? I'm interested in the mechanics of it. Have they changed what counts as qualifying? Or have we changed the mechanism of identifying who qualifies for it? Or is it something else?
There are just more students who are qualifying for special education services. Even if you look at birth to 3, their numbers have gone up. So we get our preschool students from two different ways. One is a referral who have been getting birth to 3 services. The other are referrals for students who are already in pre-K. The number of students coming up from birth to 3 has significantly increased. And what we're seeing is we're actually seeing a lot of students with more significant needs than what they have historically as well. So it's just the number of students with needs has grown.
And they haven't changed the criteria of what qualifies?
No.
It's kind of just a curious phenomena that the population of Greenwich hasn't changed very much, that we have such a like, I don't know, is it something in the water? Like, what is?
It's not just Greenwich.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. And just as Dr. Jones was saying, most of the school districts that had pre-K centers at one point in time have outgrown them. So for example, like Norwalk, I happened to be there when we built the center. They have outgrown, and they're doing half-day programs for some of those rooms so that they have AM and PM, and they can't sustain. They've outgrown. Fairfield has outgrown their center as well. So it's not just a Greenwich thing. This is definitely Fairfield County, and really we're seeing it on a state and national level as well.
How does the Birth to 3 program identify candidates?
So Birth to 3 has different criteria than we do. It is designed as a early intervention to be able to support students with even the more minor needs, to say. And then what happens is when they become 2 years, 3 months, we're notified of them and we start the evaluation process. And so they then, by the age of 3, have to go through an evaluation in which we then assess them using the criteria that IDEA has set out for preschool, elementary, middle, and high school. So it becomes that criteria. So not every student in Birth to 3 qualifies for preschool special education services, but a fair amount do.
And how do people find, is it always, do parents contact birth to 3, or is it is there an outbound component? Is there like an awareness component of it? as
Yeah,
well?
birth to 3, there's definitely an outreach component. Hospitals, doctors, there's a lot of referral processes through that. And then when a student is in birth to 3, they're entered into the system so that we're aware of who they are. So we know months, like 6 to 9 months in advance, who's coming up through the birth to 3 system. So it's run statewide, so they keep that, but there's a lot of outreach because the idea is to have early intervention. Their services are usually provided through centers or people going into the homes. It's a very different model, but the idea is to provide the services as early as possible so that students don't need that support once they come into school. And for some students, it's very positive.
I just have 2 other ones. Do we track what is the fall off rate, or I don't know how to label it, but of, what percentage of students who are classified as special ed in pre-K are still classified that way, year 1, year 2, year 3 out? Is there a drop off in that?
I would say the majority continue the qualification. We might have a few in early elementary school. Preschool goes, so even identifying at 3, they go through the same 3-year cycle of reevaluation. So their first reevaluation is usually kindergarten or first grade. We have a few that do come off, but the majority do require services past that.
And it's something that we track?
We don't track it per se, but it's data we could definitely pull because we would be able to look back to initial qualification to find out what age. We have that documentation. It's not something we pull. We can definitely do that if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd be curious about that all. And then my last one was, I noticed that there's none at Parkway. Is that been on the list of potential actions to take? Is that something to consider? Is there space there?
So we did have actually pre-K at Parkway, going back, I think the first year we moved it out was probably 2020 or 2021. And part of the reason was you were putting 3-year-olds. And if you think about what you saw on the east side of town, you have a 3-year-old on a bus going all the way to Parkway. And we were literally transporting children because we did like for 45-minute bus rides and longer if you're having a bad bus day. And it was just too far for young children to be on the bus. And that's why we actually relocated and built the program a little stronger at North Street.
Okay. Does anybody else have specific questions? No?
I do.
Wendy has her hand
Wendy
up.
has a question.
I was just wondering, how many children are just related services in pre-K?
We have a handful. I want to say 6 or 7. I might be off by 1 or 2. So we do provide speech services as a standalone service for preschool students who do qualify for that.
Okay, so those children are not the ones that are in the preschool program. They're not, it's just a related service, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I have another question. How do you determine who gets which program, right? We have a 2-hour program, a 5-hour program, and a 6.5-hour program. So how do you determine who fits into which program? Do parents get to pick?
So there should only be, there's 2 times. There's the extended day, that's the extra hour, is at Ham Ave and New Leb. And those are for students within that magnet school. So our preschool lottery actually identifies there's three different, without having the piece of paper, three
Right,
different
no, that's
tiers,
fine.
3 different tiers. So we have like the magnet school, we have community classes, and then we have like the general, the general just lottery. So we look at siblings, especially at Ham Ave and New Leb. So all that is kind of configured into into which program they go to. And then when a student as the general lottery, and then for our special education students, we always look at homeschool first if we have a school, and then we look at closest to, because as Dr. Jones was saying, we don't want our smallest children, think about 3-year-olds, on buses for a long period of time. And it's not a direct route in that I'm not going from my house to the school. I'm going from my house to pick up somebody else, to pick up another student, to pick up another student. And that is really challenging for our students. So we always try to look at where the closest school to the house is.
Okay. Okay, I think, I just want to say we might want to consider like a hub model like we do for our middle schools, rather than building a pre-K in all of our elementary schools as neighborhood pre-Ks. I think it might make more sense maybe if we revisit our Old Greenwich School ed specs, we can add a couple of classrooms there, and that can be our Eastern preschool. And then I have my GC building committee that I'm on. We're about to go into phase 3 with a renovation, but maybe we could expand and add preschool there. I just, and I don't know wherever you would want to put it for in the western end of town, but we might want to consider some consolidation into a few different areas, because I think it's going to be more expensive getting more speech therapists and OTs and PTs at each of these neighborhood schools for pre-K. I just don't think it's very cost effective. I'd be interested to see what other schools in the state are doing neighborhood preschools.
I'm sorry. I wouldn't call our preschools neighborhood preschools. Right now, the preschools are chosen, or the schools are chosen because of space. So, every time we look at a school, the reason that it's been selected as the location is because they happen to have a space available meeting the guidelines as Dr. Jones set out. And the struggle is that it's also, because these are special education students, we have to have a place for them. So it could be that there are some years where we have a lot from one area and other years it's a different. And I can give an example of next year we have a large cohort going up to New Lebanon. This year there was a large cohort that went to Hamilton Ave. Last year it was Glenville. So every year there seems to be a cohort, but it's never like a stable number. And so that's why we try to look at where the homeschool or the closest to is, because it is somewhat of a moving target.
Okay. It just seems like we're trending in the way of neighborhood preschools, because we have 6 out of 11 elementary schools. So, but okay. Thanks so much to Stacy and Dr. H and Dr. Jones for your presentation. I was hoping to take a peek at it before the meeting tonight, but did I miss it? I didn't see it added to the agenda.
So that's because I kept getting questions. And
Okay.
so I was working on the slides, trying to make sure I addressed the questions that you had.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, I have a question and a comment, in reference to what Cody was asking. And I know we talk about this all the time, and this is not just a Greenwich issue. This is not just a Connecticut issue. It's a national issue where there are more and more students being recognized with, or identified with special needs and, learning differences. And it's happening younger, and actually older students are also being more identified as they move forward in school. But this is a national trend, so it's not just happening here. And I did want to ask, based on what Wendy had just asked, because I know when we were presenting some of this discussion with the BET, and there were questions about a centralized preschool, we'd have to hire an entirely new staff from principal and assistant principal, nursing, all the specials, et cetera, if we tried to do something like that. But even when we add a preschool classroom per se at a school, and as an aside, Wendy, the ed specs that we have for Julian Curtis, I think it is phase 3, already have 2 preschool classrooms already approved for there. If I'm, our ed specs were approved that way.
Oh,
And so,
I'm sorry, I
but-
just meant we could add on to, we're about to go through our new ed specs, but right now we decided not, sorry. I'm sorry, you can finish, keep going.
Yeah. Well, we can certainly talk about that. But so my question then is because I think it's important that we have an understanding when we add a preschool classroom to an elementary school, other than hiring the classroom preschool teacher and para that maybe, or other aides for those particular classrooms and students of needs, we're not adding any OTPT or other like language staff, are we specifically?
Yes, we are. So that becomes part of the budget. So one of the things in the budget for this year is that we have looked at an increase in the contract with Constellation for OTPT. Some of that, not all of it, but some of it is for preschool. So when we have preschoolers who need that, the OTs and PTs are going in there. So as that's a contract service, it looks a little different. But for speech and language, we also, we add that into the budget. So we have added speech and language over the last couple of years. So when it's one class, we can kind of absorb it. When we know that another class, we add a 0.5 to that school. So for example, JC has 1.5 SLPs. Cobb has 1.5 SLPs.
But you're building it to the budget. My point is
Yes.
it's based on the number of students. So if you add a preschool class at Old Greenwich versus adding it at North Street, those students still have the same needs. So it's not that you're not adding staff specifically because it's at one elementary school that didn't have it beforehand, right? And a lot of those staff go from building to building during the day, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I was just trying to
Sorry.
understand. We're not hiring them specifically because it's in one building versus another.
Correct.
It's based on the students' needs, wherever they may be.
Yes.
Okay, that's where I was sorry that I didn't ask it properly. And I think the other thing that's really important, today, I was on a call with a bunch of other Board of Ed chairs from around the state, a call with CABE. And we were also talking about the governor's proposal for an endowment for universal pre-K and how it is coming probably quicker than we expect, quicker than some of these buildings that we're looking to add preschool classes to. And if that's the case, then we are looking at the possibility of truly not having space for some of these students. We also know, so I think that's something that we need to have an additional discussion on. I don't think it's happening necessarily this year, but I do know it's coming. It's something we've been talking about in the state for a very long time. And as we all know, pre-K is one of the biggest ways we can address achievement gap for our youngest students as they move forward. And it's just it's not just for students with disabilities. It's just accelerating, getting more resources for all of our students. It's exceptionally important. So I do appreciate the presentation tonight. I think it was very helpful. I think the number of students that we have is tremendous. And I think the other thing that would be interesting, and it is something we talk about, is the number of students who are traditional students. We have wait lists every single year. And so when we have the opportunity to add more preschool, we also end up having students who are paying, which we'll be talking about later, actually, tuition. So it's not just that we're adding students who aren't, who are covering for everything. That we're also adding students who are paying tuition, which helps support some of those additions of staffing, et cetera. So we can talk about that when we get to the tuition and rates. But does anybody else have any questions? Wendy, any more?
No, I'm good,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much. Okay, on to our next topic. As Dr. Mercanti Anthony is not here to address the first read of our policy 4121, I'm going to hand it over to another member of our Policy Governance Committee. Ms. Coven, would you like to introduce it?
Thank you. Yes, we were looking at the substitute teacher policy, 4121. And the main change that we're looking to make here is it did have a 40-day maximum for long-term leave of absence for substitute teachers, and we wanted to change that to 60 days because that aligns more appropriately with what's actually happening in the schools. So that's really the change that we're seeing here. And we can talk about it further if Dr. Jones or Ms. Hirsch would like to weigh in, but the change is really going from 40 to 60 days.
Yeah, makes sense. It's just that there's a clerical error in it. So
Yeah,
that's fine.
sorry, I noticed that,
Yep.
yes.
Okay.
So we need to make that change. Yes, in the third paragraph from the bottom, it says 40, right? It's written out 40 and then it's 60 in parentheses. It should be 60 for both. Thank you.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, so just, I know you noted this already, but yes, obviously there's a typo in there, but this was our policy to begin with. The biggest change we made was simply revising it from 40 to 60 days to comply with the change in the state regulations. And that was basically the majority of change, as this is our current policy.
Yep, that's really it. So I guess we'll just do the second read and at our next meeting.
Okay, on to our next discussion topic, monthly financial report, and then following that, budget transfers.
The financial report, relatively straightforward. Just one note would make is last month we mentioned we may have to do an interim appropriation for food service. We crunched the numbers and right now we think we're going to be just okay. So unless anything changes, we think we're okay on the lunch program, but nothing else really to point out. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Does anybody have questions? Anyone? Nope. Bueller? No? Okay. Then we can move on to our next next topic.
The budget transfers are pretty boring for budget transfers, so pretty straightforward, really just small dollar values, but happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Bueller? No one? Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Now we get to move on to the fun topics of our action items. And our first is the Riverside School feasibility. Sophie, since you're on the feasibility committee, did you want to make the motion or are I happy to put it on the table?
Yeah, I'm happy to make the motion. I'd like to make the motion to approve the Riverside School ed specs as presented.
I'm happy to second those. Now it's open for discussion. Anyone? Would you like to introduce it?
Sure. So I had the pleasure of serving on the feasibility committee and it was a very thorough process and we got a tremendous amount of feedback from the community. We had many community members show up at our meeting to discuss it the last time that we met. And then in addition, anyone who had the pleasure of going to the budget meeting, there were, again, a very strong showing from Riverside School. There was some incredibly compelling testimony, and I'll just really speak to two of the people who spoke. We were so lucky as to have a student come and talk about his very unfortunate experience last year of having a broken leg and having to move the classroom downstairs. I know he was very eloquent, and then another parent was there to talk about their child and the struggles that their child has, just not having the accommodations that are required for her. So I think that this is a project that is overdue, and And I think that the process was very thorough, and I'm happy to talk about it, but I'm fully in support of it. And I feel like the community is in support of it. And I was very pleased that the first selectman was enthusiastic about it when he spoke about it at the budget presentation as well.
Okay, does anybody have questions? I mean,
This is our second read, so.
Yeah, no, I just didn't know if there were any additional questions. I mean, I'm happy to, because I know part of the presentation that we had tonight on preschool was spawned from our first discussion of the Riverside School Ed specs. I know it was a discussion that we had when we were meeting with the BET. And I know it wasn't something that was necessarily discussed with the community in advance, because, you know, we're talking about parents that are already in the school and may not need preschool. But I thought the presentation we just had was very compelling in the discussion as to why we need more preschool space, at least on the eastern end of town. I want to make sure that, you know, we're being equitable for parents on all ends of town who have students with needs and attending preschool. We don't want kids on the buses for 45 minutes, especially when they're 2 or 3, or I should say 3 or 4, I should say. But I don't know. So that I don't know if anybody has a question or comment in discussion with that. I just know if Dr. Jones has said we already had an addition, every year we usually get an addition of one class in the middle of the year. We have one, and we don't even have a place to put it right now. I know we'd approved 2 preschool classes for Julie and Curtis, but that was moved, I think, to what, I think it was phase 3. So that's not happening for quite some time either. I know we'd added, I think, 2 to the plans for OG, correct? Or no, there's 2 there already, right? There's 2 there already. So we're not adding anything new at OG. So, you know, we have OG next, and they're not getting extra preschool space either. So I just, even if it's, to me, I think it's like swing space. Riverside, to me, is one of our tightest schools. And, you know, that's why we're expanding the cafeteria. They grow at an infinite rate typically. I mean, I haven't looked back at the data right now, but I don't know. What did the feasibility committee, when you guys met and had the discussion, was it a deep discussion at all, or?
I think that the pre-K consideration is something really more at a board level and at a district level. So I will say that the parents are not especially concerned about pre-K at Riverside. So if that was something that we felt like we wouldn't be able to do for some reason, I don't think, you know, the community is going to be distraught over that. However, I agree with what you were saying, that I do think, you know, the governor is talking about universal pre-K. So that may be a mandate that we have to address sometime. And, you know, I always like the saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So sometimes it's good if we see something coming to actually proactively do something about it. And sort of more concretely, that Dr. Jones has pointed out that our pre-K population continues to grow, and we're actually short a classroom right now. So, you know, to me, it seems practical to include 2 pre-K classrooms, but I don't think the Riverside community is necessarily so concerned about it so much as I think this is a town issue. And as a board, I definitely think we should talk about it, because I don't know what the other solutions are. And we've already talked about this a bit tonight, but, you know, building a standalone center, that seems like an extremely expensive option. I have no idea where it would be placed. I also just frankly don't, you know, the transportation issue is what always gets me whenever we're talking anything about moving kids around Greenwich. And, you know, anyone who drives on the Post Road knows you can drive from Riverside to the high school and it can take 15 minutes and it can take an hour. So like the idea of moving 3 and 4-year-olds around is not appealing to me. But I'm happy to have the conversation, and I welcome it.
Ms. Stowe?
Yeah, I'm sort of torn here because a part of me says, you're right, the writing on the wall, that it seems that pre-K is going to become more and more a thing in our state and perhaps our country. It seems to be going in that way. Now, frankly, it's been in New York for a while, so I suspect it's going to be moving here. At the same time, we have a little bit more of a private school, preschool population, and we do a lot of cross-training, to be fair, between our private school preschools and our public as they transition to public school. So I do think Greenwich is a bit more unique in that sense. So I kind of see both sides of this, I guess. Let me just be clear. A part of me thinks that it's hard to retroactively build preschool classrooms, and that's the part that's a little tough, given the first floor issue. But at the same time, I don't want to be short-sighted because I think the Riverside community really deserves this building. And let's just be frank, I think that we are more likely going to have support from our financial colleagues if we're a little bit more thoughtful about perhaps not including those classrooms. So I'm torn. I'd like to see our board be together on this. And so I guess I'd like to just hear from some of my colleagues.
I'll start with Cody and then I'll go to Laura.
I admittedly don't feel like I know enough yet on the pre-K special ed. I guess the analysis of what you were presenting, Tony, but that was a super helpful presentation. My hunch is that is in line with some of the some of what Kathleen just expressed, which is that the project seems great outside of the pre-K expansion, which I'm not sold on. And what I just want to work out is my intuitive feeling is that there's a better way to do it, especially given that the kind of opportunity cost of that space in the building, like there is an opportunity cost of it. So just to answer your question, my head would be against it without taking the pre-K space out. And then I feel like there's a better solution on the pre-K side, but my hesitation is because I don't quite have it yet. Although I think my hunch is that there's one there, which I know is probably an annoying thing to hear, Tony, but you're like, I just told you what it is. But so yeah, that's where I'm at.
Ms. Costin.
Having had two kids go through the GPS preschool system, I feel like I have a very good handle on our methodology. So if you haven't had that experience, it may not be as clear to you.
But you should make a joke that I was more
were-
recently in the pre-K
Yes,
system.
you could go right back. So I will say, I do see a need, and I do want to say, I don't think there were any preschool families on the feasibility committee because, you've got current families who have kids in the school who really just want a school with fire safety, and sprinklers and, an adequately sized building. So I don't know that that was a representative sample of families who would benefit from it. But I see a clear need. I mean, I think Old Greenwich pre-K is already full, I think. Yeah, so I see a need. I don't think that we should be short-sighted about that need. Dr. Jones has already told us they need one now. And to be frank, the number of children diagnosed with autism nationwide is astounding. It just grows every year. So I don't think that the trend is not that there's going to be a decline in need. So I think we should move forward with the best building that meets the needs of the community and meets the needs of the students. And the de minimis, if we're talking about a $40 million project, how much can 2 classrooms cost? At most 300,000, if that may even be high. So when you're already building a building, I think you need to, stop counting pennies and build the building the community needs. I think it's you know, there's absolutely no reason financially to not, when you're building a building, to not add a classroom that can't possibly cost that much.
Just to jump on that, I was going to say, as a parent coming from Glenville, when Glenville was being rebuilt, and the discussions then that took place, which were, you'll never reach X number of sections in your school. Historically, you've never hit that number. You're never going to hit that number. Guess what? We hit that number within a year of reopening the new school, and we were having to scramble for space and reorganize things to make them into classrooms. And, you know, much like Laura, I was going to say, that's why I said, even if they're not, you know, assigned as pre-K, even if it's just additional swing space, we know we've had classrooms in our schools that flooded or had to close for a certain period of time or wing. Like, we don't have spaces to move children to when we need them. We have a school that we know is historically the one that grows at a rate, which is Riverside. I know, you know, again, the cost of building those 2 classrooms doesn't mean we're automatically going to fill them with students and you know, desks and things like that. I just think it's the opportunity cost to do it when a building is being put together and the walls are open and you can build it then, as opposed to trying to like hack through a wall to add something on. It's much less expensive to do it in advance, coming from a family of, you know, engineers. You know, I just, that's my thought. And I know we've discussed it ad infinitum, but, you know, I'd love to know. I mean, it's like, you know, Laura said, at that point, it's not a significant additional cost.
We went
that's just my
went
thought.
through this with CMS. The classroom, I mean, we looked at every possible way to save money. And, you know, when you're building a building, an additional classroom is a couple $100,000. There's just no other, there's no other way to quantify how minute in a $40 million project it is. It just doesn't make any sense.
But I do also recognize Kathleen's comments on working with, you know, with the, you know, financial, you know, situation in town. So, Ms. Behet?
I'd have to say that I do agree with Ms. Hirsch and Ms. Costin on a couple of different points. We do, you know, to kind of echo what's been said, we do have the opportunity to be proactive and forward thinking on space here. There is a need. There, from what I've seen, there is a clear established need. I'm not sure what more we can provide on that front to justify having more pre-K classrooms. I think there's been extensive work done on that, and this is a need and the trend that's happening, particularly as it relates to our special education students. And I think at this point, these are the recommendations that have been made through very thorough and exhaustive work. And I'm looking forward to supporting the specification.
Ms. Vizzo-Walsh?
I just wanted to say that I am in full support and I'm excited about this project, but without the pre-K. And Dr. Mercanti, who isn't here tonight, he also shares my view. And just to a couple of comments that I have from other people that I heard from tonight, weren't there 2 PTA chairs representing all parents on this committee, and none of them mentioned the preschool and how much they wanted it? And it's not just 300,000, Ms. Costin, it's 2.5 million for the pre-K edition, and it's another 200,000 for the preschool playground. And I know that you are adding 2 more classrooms at JC, but I was saying with our expansion, we could add 2 more classrooms if need be there, and that's more centrally located for everybody.
What pricing was included for the pre-K on the Riverside Ed specs?
I think it's another 2.5 million. That's what I thought I saw in the budget.
For the class, are you talking about for the 2 classrooms?
Yeah,
and
the two,
playground?
yeah.
That's a very nice playground. I'm gonna go look. I'm not saying it's
I
not
don't know
2.5. I
we
just
had
didn't.
that.
Yes, 2.5 plus contingency. Yep. I mean, I don't have my budget book in front of me right now, but that number sticks out in my head.
Well, it wouldn't be in the budget book. It'd be in the
Not the
ed
budget
specs.
book, the ed specs, which is in another binder. Anyway, okay, that's all I have to say.
No, but let's find the numbers because
Yes,
that's
I wanna go
relevant. So
look
I'm
at that.
looking through it now.
Sorry, as we all now scroll through the 80 pages of, yeah, I know.
Mr. Branyan, are you able to find that number?
He's scrolling too, but on real paper.
I think it's around where the space is and the handout on space.
I mean, I see costs on page 77 of playgrounds and equipment, but I assume it's also, there's playground equipment for grades 2 through 5 included in there.
At the very end of the ed specs, it has that document with the cost, the conceptual estimates. Unfortunately, as I look at it, it's based on the trades. So page 1 is all trades and it is based on square footage. I had a super quick email exchange with the architect. If looking at that addition on the south, that's the mass of the 2 pre-K. I think it's like 2,700 and change square feet. It's not as simple as just reducing the square footage from the conceptual estimate. They'd have to rerun it all. Wendy is correct. There's the playground number is the very last page, almost the third to the last page in the conceptual estimate. That's when you look at site development. There is a $200,000 for playground equipment, grades 2 through 5. I've yet to find the pre-K one, but
Page 77 had the playground, but that's why I said it has grades 2 through 5 listed there.
if it's an interest, we can try to see how long it takes to have this updated to remove pre-K. But the architect did say you just simply can't take the square footage and remove it because it's all based on the trades throughout the whole building.
The other systems and things. I just remember having a discussion on Central Middle School, right? Because it's cost of a lot of other stuff. Yep.
So I can neither confirm or deny the number of the 2 million.
Okay, thank you.
If I might add, because you mentioned central, when you're this early in the process for a construction project, that's why you often hear about price per square foot. And so if you just take that 600 number, you're looking at about $800,000 per classroom, give or take. And it just depends on what they calculate in, but we don't actually have a design. I mean, you could slightly change the square footage. There are, different approaches they could have, but you're still looking at a price per square foot is how they're going to back into it basically. But we can try to get a better number. This was a cost estimator, so that was the whole idea on this project.
Is there a way that maybe we could approve this in like 2 parts? Like, do I make a motion sans pre-K, but then with an additional?
Well, I think Ben was saying, and I mean, I'm sure, anything is possible, but Mr. Brandon was just saying that in order to approve the ed specs without the pre-K classrooms, it's not just removing the pre-K classrooms. He said they'd have to revise other portions of it. Am I correct? Or you were saying, I mean, it's because it's obviously other things like, HVAC and other, envelope I just see on page 20, the two core, spaces for pre-K.
Updating the ed specs themselves is relatively straightforward. If you were to remove the pre-K, it's just going through the exercise of the it's a 24-page document on the conceptual estimate, and that's where it depends on the square footage. They have a price of concrete. How much is the concrete for that particular piece? They have the reinforcement. They go through all of the different trades. That's what just makes it not as simple as just pull out the 2,700 square feet. So it's the architect, it can be done. I would prefer to have the professional. This was one reason we picked them. We wanted the conceptual estimate.
Sophie?
I think the question that we're kind of presented with as a board is if we're looking at this and saying, do we want to have pre-K and Riverside or not based on the cost? It's not just the cost of the pre-K in Riverside School, it's then the cost of what is the alternative. And we could go down a real rabbit hole on this, but I'll just present a couple hypotheticals. One would be, okay, what does it cost alternatively to build 2 more pre-Ks at JC in addition to the 2 pre-Ks that were already included in the ed spec? Is it going to be more cost effective to have 4 pre-Ks at JC? Is it even possible? Is there even space there? And then if you're busing kids from Riverside and Old Greenwich to Julian Curtis, do we look at what is the cost per year? Do we look at what's the cost over 10 years or 20 years? I mean, so I don't know how in-depth of an analysis we all want to do. And that's partly a question for you, Cody, because you were raising it, it's like, how are we looking at this? If it's really purely a cost question, and we're just saying that feels like a lot of money. It's like, well, that feels like a lot of money compared to what exactly, and what are these alternative solutions that we are considering? We have no price tag attached to any of the alternative solutions. So I just find that a little tricky.
Oh, Cody,
Jen,
sorry.
Cody, unless you want to respond first.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. You definitely want to consider it against the alternative costs. The cost to me is part of it, but it's also the question of whether it's the right place to be adding capacity, which I'm not convinced of. And I think it's partially reflected in the, parental feedback. I mean, in my short experience here, I feel like anytime we consider spending money on anything, an army of people show up and send us emails saying, please spend money on this, please spend money on this. And this one doesn't feel that way, and maybe they'll all be at the next meeting. So that it's potentially cost, but also just is it the optimal place to do it? And I asked Tony for some data on the distribution of the students in the program, and I was interested in going through that. But yeah.
Jen, then Laura,
I'd just like to know, maybe Dr. Jones, you
and then
can
Wendy. Sorry.
address it. How are those children in the district then, if we don't have the space for them, we don't have a place for them, what are their options? They can go to one of the private preschools, correct?
No.
And if-
Mm-mm. It's not, in the sense that it depends on the preschool. So many of them don't even have certified staff. So community preschools generally have people that have an early childhood certificate, but they are not certified with the state of Connecticut. So we can't actually use a lot of those programs to service children in the way that we would.
So there's no option for those families in town that would receive the level of services that we could provide at the public school, the GPS preschool, if their demand is there. Or maybe I should ask it another way. What's an alternative for a family, I would say, that has potentially a special education preschooler, if not with our with our preschool options, if obviously none available for spacing and other.
We are required by federal law to provide it. I mean, that's the basic, at a basic level. So what happens is what you're seeing right now this school year. We have more children qualifying. We were not able to put that classroom where we thought we were going to be able to in February. So now the class is growing larger than we would like it to be. We've gone above our 6 peers. We have 7 and 8, and we'll definitely be at 8, I would say, in all 17 classrooms, more than likely by the end of the year, which is more than what we would want. The next kind of worst case scenario is you're moving somebody out of a classroom where there is a restroom in order on the lower level in order to make space. And that has to be a program where maybe we have a special education room and we have to move somebody out where now they're in a room with another special ed teacher because you're overcrowded. And just, to give an example, I've been looking at our, pre-K enrollment for next year. And when I think about just the size of like Riverside on the list, it doesn't mean they will all come, but right now we have 106 children on the list. That's 4 or 5 sections. Glenville was supposed to already be in the 80s, but they have 96 children on their list at Glenville. So, I mean, we have a large wave of kiddos coming through, and what they call COVID babies, when the birth rate went back up, they're just starting, and they will be in the elementaries for several years. Once they start with us, they, matriculate through. So we do have to serve them by federal law. So we just have to figure it out.
So I'm just to jump in. So my point is we have to, we also can't grow these pre-K classrooms to significant sizes or, once you start to really play with the ratio of students, you're really impacting the achievement of the students, with needs in accessing their, goals, right? Okay, well, Laura and then Wendy.
I would just like to say to Cody, some of us went to the budget presentation where dozens and dozens of Riverside parents came out to demand that we approve the ed specs as they were presented.
Yeah, but I was specifically referring to advocating for the pre-K, which I think Sophie's comments just reflected what I was saying.
But they all said, please, please approve them as presented with the pre-K.
I'll make a comment related to the budget. I've noticed many people come here and say, I would like to advocate for the superintendent's budget. And I've never interpreted that to mean that they agree with every single line item and are well informed about it.
Wendy?
I don't remember who brought it up, but somebody did say Parkway. We don't have anybody there currently, right, for pre-K? So we have classrooms there. Why don't we just put children there?
Well, I know Dr. Jones can probably address it, but a lot of it was in regards to having the students on transport, the buses and the transportation to get back there. Some of the youngest of our students, like, 3-year-olds are on buses for up to 45 minutes to get there. And it just was not the best practice for the youngest students to be on buses that long. It's not best practice for any student to be on the bus that long, but, is that, oh yeah, so Dr. Jones is shaking her head. Sophie?
Okay, so I have a suggestion so that we can move forward on the action item. My suggestion is I think this conversation about pre-K is a very complicated one, and we have a lot of information that we should probably gather to think about what does this mean for our district. I think there's stuff happening at the state level that's really important that we also need to understand more. The transportation issues in terms of how do you safely and appropriately transport 3-year-olds, and also what does it cost to do so. So my suggestion is that we would take the pre-K classrooms out of the ed specs for Riverside School and otherwise approve the ed specs as presented, and that we have a longer and more robust conversation about what are we doing as a district with pre-K, because what we're talking about is, yes, the 2 classrooms certainly would help, and in many ways I would like to vote in favor of them, but I'm also trying to be practical here. And there seems to be universal support for this project otherwise. And certainly the community is very eager to have it move forward. But I hope that we can then have a very robust conversation about what are we doing with pre-K and how are we going to handle. I agree. The numbers continue to go up. I don't see any reason why they would start to go down. And we should talk about all the options and look at what is best practice. And look at the 20-year cost of busing kids and all of that, because I would like to see all that information as well.
I was going to point out that this is the discussion that we're having on pre-K is not just about the ed specs. It's a much deeper and more philosophical discussion on pre-K. Cody pointed it out, right? Like, is this the appropriate place to have those classrooms and those students? And so I think the other point of it is once we approve these ed specs without, with or without pre-K, those are the ed specs. And I think if we want to remove pre-K, Ben was saying that we can't just remove the pre-K. We'd have to go through, right? So we'd have to get another document from them if we want to approve it without pre-K. Is that correct?
Well, I think you can approve the concept without
Yeah.
pre-K. I don't think we need to, sorry,
think he
Ben,
was saying
I don't know if I could keep doing this. Can I just add one thing? I think what Sophie said is spot on. And I think that if, after we do the analysis, if for whatever reason it says, no, the most cost effective or the most practical or whatever term you want to use is that it's going to be at Riverside, then fine. It's not like Riverside's being built tomorrow. I suspect we can then go and add it back, but I think it's prudent for us to now make this decision to approve these ed specs sans pre-K and move it forward to the finance board.
No, absolutely. You do not need costs for the ed specs. The ed specs are going to, we like to have the cost as it helps up frame the conversation, but you don't need that. It helps going forward. We'll update the BET so we know what the project cost is.
That's what I was trying to get is if we could approve it, because you were saying you can't just remove the pre-K space to do it. So you're saying we can approve it without that, and then we'll just get updated.
Yes,
facts and
you
figures.
approve the
Perfect.
ed specs as edited, and then we'll work with the architect to
Perfect.
update the estimates.
Well, the motion on the table is to present, approve them as presented. So it sounds like somebody may have
I'd like to make a motion to amend that we approve the ed specs as presented, except remove the 2 pre-K classrooms. This is for the Riverside School.
Is there a second?
I'm happy to second that.
Okay, so we have a second. We've obviously don't need to put it on the table to discuss because we've been discussing it. So I will say, wait, all in favor of the amended? No? Yes? Are you in favor of it as amended with the removal of pre-K? Reluctantly, I will also support it because, I don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face. So that passes with a 7-0. And I know Dr. Mercanti had also wanted to support that. So if he was here, it would be unanimous. So thank you. So I guess we'll just ask for the revised version of ed specs without the pre-K. Thank you, guys. Next up, tuition and fees. Come on back.
No, you skipped the music course.
Oh, I'm sorry. Music course first. I guess I did have that written down incorrectly. My bad. So I will put that, I see why I was taking notes in the wrong spot. So I'll just make the motion to approve the Honors Modern Band course for inclusion in the GHS course of study guide as presented. Is there a second? So Sophie raised her hand first. So does anybody have questions or comments? Otherwise, we can go to a vote. Okay, so all in favor of adding the course? Wendy, I don't see you. Wendy?
Yes, yes,
Yes, okay.
yes.
Okay, so that's a 7-0. Awesome, fantastic. Thank you guys for all your hard work. I'm sure this is going to provide some fantastic, more art at the high school musically. So I guess now we are on to, to tuition and fees. So
The item before you is an annual exercise the board does. The change in front of you is just a change in methodology. with that page 2 of the document for me, we tried to align the current model with the proposed model. And I just want to point out that it represents a 2-year lag. When last year, the year we're sitting in, fiscal year 25, it has the tuition that was approved was 26,812, which is based on fiscal year 23.
Nobody's made a motion, so I wanted to make a motion so we can actually have the discussion. So I will just make the motion to approve the 2025, 2026 tuition rates as presented. Is there a second? Laura? Okay. Now it's on the table. Continue. Sorry.
No worries. So the methodology we're proposing is, I think we'll true up the tuition to more the best data we have. The state releases their net current expenditures per pupil, or the NCEP, in January of 25. So the timing's perfect for a February vote. That 25 is based off of fiscal year 24 information that the board and the town presents, or actually uploads to the state, and which is then audited. So you have that fiscal year 24 number is 27,660. So that's based off of the expenses the town incurred for fiscal year 24. So we're taking that number, applying a 3-year average, and then that comes up with the number, the 25, and then we apply what we're asking for 26 to get you the number in front of you is the 30,350. And if this is approved tonight, that methodology will then just go forward the same logic. And we've closed that gap between the cost of education based rather than the 2-year lag.
Does anybody have any questions? Cody?
Can I just make a comment?
Of course.
Ben, I think you did a really nice job coming up with a sound methodology that makes sense here. Oh, I'll make one other comment. I was interested in the question of if the NCEP was properly burdened by, if it was missing out on any expenses. And I did use ChatGPT, and because of all the stuff that's reported in the Connecticut, whatever websites, it seems that it doesn't, but can you confirm that it doesn't actually miss out? I know that the state, it doesn't include pension costs, but since those are supported by a different tax stream of revenues, it seems that that's okay. Is there anything else that it misses?
Not to my knowledge. I like to call this the mother of all reports. The town provides all of the in-kind contributions, the capital expenses. We report that up. We report our expenses and the grants. It's all the local expenses, and that's the best way when you look at it's difficult to compare Board of Ed's budgets without looking at the state numbers, because they do the all-in. But you're absolutely right. It's the best capture sans the state retirement, because that is a different revenue stream. This is the local revenue stream. It best represents the per pupil cost.
Kathleen?
I agree. I think it was a great analysis. Thank you, Ben. Just if you could remind me, I probably should know this by now, but who came up with the 15% and the 25% of for the town employees and the GPS employees? Because it's not a part of any union contract, right?
I don't believe it's a part of the contract, and I did try to track that down because I was curious. I think it's the same percentage that was here in play when I was here 14 years ago.
Fascinating. And I think someone asked the question, but do you happen to know how many people, are utilizing the 15% rate and the 25% rate?
I was hoping no one would ask me that question because I did not get a chance to pull that.
Wendy did ask that, right?
I think that was just for preschool, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, the preschool I saw, but I didn't pull we can pull it, but it's just I did not pull it for tonight.
I could have sworn it was in our enrollment report. Am I wrong?
I mean, I feel
think
like
it
I
was
know a
in
lot of people,
enrollment.
so I just, it
I'll
would just
pull
be
that while
interesting.
we're-
I mean, I think it's a great perk that we provide our school personnel and our town personnel. And I would love for it to even get a little bit more recognition, I suppose. And that's why I think it's important for us to analyze a little bit of the various percentages.
Yeah, I'm curious about that as well. And also, I just wanted to know, I'm if we're doing research on the origins of all of this, I was curious about the pre-K and the town of Greenwich and the GPS staff, qualifying for the discounted pre-K. And when did that start, or is there a policy that we could look to or any, just to understand it better?
You're looking for the number or just how they qualify?
No, I see the number, but I just didn't know sort of what the origin was of that, because it, to me, like intuitively makes sense that the K through 12, being able to have your kids go to school where you teach and paying the tuition and having it be discounted, but the pre-K feels like just a little bit different, because obviously, as we just discussed, not everybody in town gets to send their kids to GPS pre-K. So I was just kind of curious, sort of how did that develop, and how long standing is it? I don't even know how long we've had pre-K, so maybe it's relatively new.
I think what's important there is that if it's town of Greenwich employees or if it's school district employees, they are the last tier. So even if they want to be in the lottery, they do not get a place, and they start out on the wait list because they're the bottom that actually draw for a spot. So it's only, and it tends to be like if we have a class where people turn it down because they went to a different pre-K, and we start working through the wait list and school's already started, a lot of families their children are already settled, so they'll choose to not come to our pre-K. So we have very, very few. Well, as a matter of fact, we have 7. Yeah, and that's it out of all those pre-K kiddos.
Quick, one more question. I'm very happy with the analysis, and if it's important, I'm happy to approve this tonight. But I was just wondering if we wanted to have a little bit more background before approving something like this. I know people are probably making their plans now, but the percentages are relevant, and the number of people utilizing the program, I think, are important to know.
We can get that data. I would say it's not particularly relevant for setting the rates. I would recommend you set the rates tonight so we can inform the BET to change their revenue assumptions, which would be helpful during their budget consolidation next week. But we can certainly get you the historical run going forward. I think it is important so we can start planning, everyone can start planning what the numbers are, particularly pre-K. We've already been asked, like, hey, what's the tuition for next year? So it would, if it's possible, it'd be great to pass tonight.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I really appreciate this because I was looking back through past historical tuition rates and discussions that we'd had. And from back in 2023, when we started talking about tying the tuition rates, this was while you were still working for the town, but tying them to our budget, operating budget and per pupil spending and increases, because we weren't moving those tuition rates up very much, and we wanted to be commensurate with the actual cost. So I wanted to say, much like Cody and Kathleen, thank you so much for taking this deep dive and going in here to do that, which is what we've been looking towards doing for, I don't know, it was a year and a half at least or longer, but just making sure that we did a full review and an overhaul of the tuition rates and fees, which, was much needed.
I pulled some numbers on something separate for tuition students in the high school, and I think it was something like 60 or 70 total. It's not that, out of the total population, it's pretty small.
It definitely is a small number,
Yeah.
but it's and I look back years ago that we used to provide the numbers and then that stopped, but we can figure out what the number is and then just give you a correct.
But I actually have that number. It's in the enrollment report, page 11. So that little booklet we had for the BET a week or so ago. We have elementary is 55, middle school's 29, high school's 57.
So
Thank you. So it's in the budget book we gave to the
Well done.
BP.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank that, in case anybody wants to go digging for it. So, so I don't know if that changes your thoughts on approving these, but I do agree with Ben, but helpful to do this before the BET starts to go through all of their budget assumptions. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Wendy?
I just
You
don't
have that-
understand. I just don't understand the rationale behind these rates. I mean, how close to market rates are these? These seem very low. And it does cost money to run our programs.
the number that we based it off of was a calculated number. So I'll just refer to you to fiscal year 24 and the proposed model, that 27,660. That is as close as you can get to market rate based off of actual expenditures, both on the BOE side and the town hall side, including all of the benefits, payroll, medical, and local pension for the non-certified staff. That's an all-in number. So that's the best number and this is the most accurate number market. We just then inflated it based on an average and then the requested, so that you could debate note 3 and note 4 on the escalator, but 2024 is the most accurate.
Okay, thank you for explaining.
Cody?
And Wendy, I think this is all based on the idea that we should be charging what it costs, our best estimate of what it costs to educate a student. I think you bring up an interesting point that the notion of the market price can be different than the cost. And the market price would be more based on what it costs to get an alternative, option that's of similar quality, and that probably would be a higher number. But I feel like it would be that's a discussion we could have at some point. I doubt it would go anywhere. Of should we price differently or should we price at a premium? But I think this particular exercise was just taking the existing methodology and correcting it, which is relatively non-controversial. Is that?
Are you talking about market rates for private elementary, middle, and high school, or are you just talking about market rate for preschool, private preschool? Because if you're looking at the market rate for private school, we're basing it off of what our costs are versus private school, which is also, they include endowments, and there's so much that's included in their fees, and the fees for kindergarten are different than the fees for 8th grade or 9th grade and so forth. If you're looking at private school, that's why I was just curious. I was curious to see what you were referring to.
I guess primarily the preschool. It still seems kind of low, but okay. I mean, I understand what Ben said.
But anybody any other questions, comments? Okay, so I'd like to vote on this tonight if that's possible. So the motion's on the table to approve these as presented. All in favor? Okay, that is a 7-0. Thank you. Wendy, I saw your hand up. I suppose it was for voting, correct?
Yes, it was.
Okay, just checking. A few. Okay, thank you. So now we are on to agenda plan. Kathleen?
I was wondering if we could, this is just sort of getting philosophical, 10 o'clock here at night and I haven't eaten, but Tony, earlier you mentioned, and I think it's great, the change that was made at the high school in terms of not having to do overrides when you're recommended for a particular class. And I'm only privy to it because I have students at the high school. So I think it's something we should discuss more broadly because I'm not sure the rest of the board was aware of it. So I'd like to understand a little bit of the thinking behind that because I already had a few texts tonight questioning the thought. But it makes me, especially after this robust presentation from PCJ, I guess I'd love to do a deeper dive on the high school in general. I think there's so many cool things happening there. And you and I have talked about this a little bit, right? So there's AP classes and there are so many. There are honors classes and we have different, how do we end up, but sometimes you have on-level classes and there's multiple options from, we don't call it practical anymore, but right, to honors to AP. Honors and AP are weighted the same. People have been debating that for years. And I know there's so much to what I'm bringing up, but I think it would be such a fun conversation to have at a board level. Just our high school does awesome, and we see how well the kids go on. And so I think there's so much to just learn and for everyone to be aware of. I feel like I know a lot of it because I'm in it, but I'm not sure the whole board appreciates what's happening at the high school. And I think it would just be really cool to talk about at a board level.
As an aside, when we were at XCOM this past week, I know Dr. Jones was unable to attend, but we had a very robust discussion specifically there in regards to the weighting of midterms and finals. And one of the pieces we were specifically talking about was what you were talking about, is weighting the different classes. We were talking about the consistency in grading across, different teachers who are teaching the same class, and the pacing and all of the other things, and talking about, it wasn't necessarily even about weighting, because that may not be the thing that's really going to support changing the stress and anxiety for students. And so we had a very robust, deep discussion. So I think it would be very interesting because that's what we just started talking about. If we're doing a look at the high school, it's a good opportunity to hear about all the incredible programs. And we're just talking about the Wellness Center through PCG and other areas and things that we have in the high school, and I think that talking about weighting can be part of that, because again, it took us in a very different path in the discussion at XCOM. I wish the students were still here to talk about it. It was incredible to hear their perspective on things, because, we as adults don't always know what it is that they need, and sometimes they have the best ideas. So I think it would be.
I think it'd be fun.
a
And that's
nice
why,
dive.
and especially like doing it in a March meeting, right? We actually might get a lot of the students come out, get their thoughts. I know going through the college process now, a lot of, frankly, the colleges unweight a lot of their grades, right? Because then they sort of look at the rigor of the class and they reweight it. So, but why not learn from those experiences, right? So I just think it'd be fun, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to check with the curriculum team. It sounds like a really big presentation to do a good job for you. And because we already have the K-12 math update, they're working on that. And they also have the curriculum updates that are coming. So let me see where we can fit it in the calendar, because I want to make sure we can do a good job and really outline, what we're going to present to you.
I was also going to say, I think maybe it would be helpful. Kathleen, I'm happy to sit and talk to you about what the actual ask is, because I don't think we need to go through the curriculum at the high school, because, when we get, we're going to be getting the course catalog, and that details a lot of that information that's there, like how many APs we offer, how many honors classes. I think Kathleen's talking about something slightly different. So before we go ask when we could do you want to?
I'm happy to
talk
put
about it?
together the template for it. I've already starting to think about in my head what it looks like. So I could just sort of take a shot at it.
Yeah, if you send that, and anybody else that has ideas, but if you have a template in your head, send that, and then I can run that past the curriculum team.
I just figured it'd be better for us to know the actual ask before we figure out if and when, or more like when. So that would be, welcome your thoughts. Yep.
I have two questions. So it was a request that we put the field use on here. And so we do have that on next month. I really don't know what that is. And Mike's not here to actually provide direction. He's the one that was asking for it. So if anybody has feedback on that, we've put it on there at the request, but I don't know
yeah,
what I need to have ready for you.
I think you can put an asterisk next to that if we need to add it there, or if we need to move it.
Okay.
I'll just wait for Dr. Mercanti Anthony to chime in, because as it was his request. I think it would be best to hear what his specific ask was. Yep.
Last thing, LiUNA did finally ratify. And so Dr. Budd has asked if there's any way, perhaps next week, that we could do a very fast, executive session, here's the contract, come out and vote. Because we are trying to get it, through the whole RTM process. And they don't, during the budget, they have a whole month where they won't take other items. So if we could find a time, we promise it won't be lengthy, to take a vote, which is what we did, I think, on the teacher contract.
Are you looking to try to add that for, I know we always have a hold on Thursday nights. Is that what you were looking to do
Whatever
that?
works for the board.
I can't speak for anybody else, but Thursday is the day that I could do it, but. And if we're just doing, we're doing executive, obviously we usually prefer to do it in person, but as this is we're putting this on last minute, we can discuss being flexible if need be. Does Thursday work for you guys? Wendy? Thoughts?
Hold on just a second. Let me just look. Yeah, the 27th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If it,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't think it would be long.
Okay.
Very quick. So I don't know, what do you think would work best, Dr. Jones? Do you want to do 7? 7, does that work for everybody? 6, 7? 7? I want to defer to those who are coming and from elsewhere. What? Half an hour, I would say is that good? 7?
6 or 6:30 might be good.
I just know we have somebody, at least one person that commutes back from the city.
Okay.
So I'm trying to be respectful of end times. Are you in the city? I thought you were up here. No, that's why I said it wasn't you. I was thinking about Mike. Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Well, you tell me what works. I mean, if you want to do 6, 6:30, you want to do 7, I'm open. That's 6. All right, 6 o'clock it is. Does that work?
Does that conclude our agenda plan?
Works for me.
Okay. What? Jen?
I wanted to just go back to the pre-K discussion and have some, not this evening, but in terms of our next meeting and any agenda planning, to, set some parameters on our discussion for this moving forward, as the need seems to be pretty great that we
So
need.
you want to bring a pre-K discussion back at another meeting?
Yes, just because I know we worked with the ed specs and I understand that there is this need for pre-K. The question is where we put it, obviously, and it's definitely worth talking about. But I would like to not see it kind of go on and kind of have an end game.
Well,
Because we
I
can
think-
always keep like talking about, well, what about this possibility and that possibility and which is
Yeah.
great, but I think at a certain point, I think we really need to set parameters on it and figure this out. And
Well, yeah, we were
it
talking about it
works
in a
with-
philosophical manner, but I also think that in regards to what you're saying is what Cody was saying, that wants to figure out, like, where's the right place to add capacity? How do we do this? You guys were looking at, and Sophie was talking about the alternative costs, to do things
Right.
elsewhere. So I
And-
think we should you're right. Like, I think, again, we should figure out what our specific ask is. We can put that together. You guys can shoot ideas to whatever. We'll put together or we'll just do a Google Doc with thoughts. And that way Dr. Jones can sort of have a better idea of what we're asking for before we figure out when to bring that
Yeah,
back.
I just, it's
that work for
so
everybody?
important. And I know we talk, not the board specifically, but there are a lot of conversations that take place for years and years and years. And if we're in a position to really, deep dive on it, let's do it.
I'm happy to volunteer to put something together and circulate it and say, like, this is what I think we want to look at. Because I agree. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. I think it's kind of like, okay, here are 3 different scenarios, right? And then let's cost them out and figure it out and do it over 25
Agreed.
years. And so that we have some numbers to work with. They're not going to be perfect, but instead of having, like you said, we don't want to go in circles.
Right. I was saying tonight was philosophical. We want to get to actual detailed data.
And we also have kiddos waiting to come to the program. So we
Yeah.
really need to address that.
I was going to say the building has already told, like, they didn't have bats flying here tonight, but they've definitely told us the building is saying it's time to go because they just turned the lights off. I know somebody here has a motion they want to make. Laura,
Motion to adjourn.
I see Jen seconding it. All right, all in favor? All right. Wendy's hand is up. So that's 7-0. Right? Wendy, you're voting for that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you and good night.